Chapter 81. Changes. You, Dumbledore started, but Snape pretended not to hear. In Harry's mind, he would not starve to death, but he had not tasted food for a long time. Now anyone who comes to disturb him while he is eating is a bad person. Wow, the sour and sweet taste of this juice exploded in his taste buds, and Snape savored the multiple layers of taste. Wow, this tomato jam with moderate sweetness and sourness, paired with the juicy sausage. The perfect cooking time made the sausage crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. My God, this soft and delicious, fluffy bread with a light wheat aroma makes people's saliva secrete vigorously. Snape was so happy that he could hardly maintain his equanimity. This feeling seemed like the first time he saw Lily under the tree. Food is a basic need for the human body. Dumbledore watched from the side and began to confirm that this person was the real professor who had disappeared for a long time. It was impossible for a fake professor to behave like this if he had enough food every day. Only if the real professor had not eaten for a long time would he look like a starving ghost reincarnated. Dumbledore was in a good mood. He didn't want to go to class in the first place as he had so much work to do every day and he also had to find time to tutor Snape. Now the real professor was back. As for the handover of the remaining courses, the real professor would take charge. Dumbledore stood up with a happy expression, his eyebrows flying up with joy, and a light flashing in his eyes. He walked quickly towards his office. Anyone could see his good mood. He was going to take another nap, as he stayed up all night last night. You can imagine the joy of going to school during the winter vacation, but the school suddenly informs you that the class will be postponed for 7 days for some reason, so you can go home. Wait, Snape suddenly called to Dumbledore, I'll go with you. I have something to tell you. Oh. Dumbledore turned slightly, with a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Is it related to the time he was missing? The two came to the office together. Harry, do you still need me to wait for you there? Draco, who was eating at the dining table, suddenly caught a glimpse of Dumbledore and suddenly realized that he seemed to have forgotten something. Listening to the belated voice, Harry held his forehead helplessly. He had forgotten that there was such a function. They could still communicate in their minds, but the time was limited. As for Draco, if Dumbledore had not sent Fawkes to follow him yesterday, he would not have been unscathed by the giant python's desperate entanglement with his head. Harry thought of the big snake and put his hands in his pockets, touching the cold and delicate scales inside his pockets. Ben sensed his master's touch and rubbed his head on Harry's fingers. The basilisk remained motionless, as if it was still asleep. No, go eat first. Harry thought Draco was still waiting for him at the door of the bathroom on the second floor, so he communicated with him first to confirm where he was and avoid unnecessary trouble. Harry thought about his arrangements yesterday, which were indeed a bit inappropriate. Draco looked at the rich breakfast on his plate, picked up the hot chocolate milk next to him, and drank it in one gulp. The sweet, mellow, and silky taste made Draco sigh comfortably. A beautiful misunderstanding was created just like that. Draco withdrew from the conversation with peace of mind, but Ron was still worried about Harry and was obviously absent-minded while eating breakfast. Harry's stomach started to growl at this time, and he slowly walked to the cafeteria. Ron had almost finished eating. When he walked out of the cafeteria, he saw Harry who was late and put his worry aside. Harry noticed that his personal attribute panel began to change. Name, Harry Potter. Age, 11 years old. Physical fitness, 30 plus 10 plus 5. Appearance, 76 plus 5 plus 1.5. Soul strength, 75 plus 15. Intelligence level, 50 plus 10 plus 5. Mana reserve, 20 plus 20 plus 10. Plant affinity, 5 plus 20. Alchemy talent, 70 plus 15. Potion ability, 65 plus 5. Combat skills, 70 plus 15 plus 10. Language arts, 3 plus 20. Flying ability, 80 plus 10 plus 1.5. You didn't absorb anything this time, but at least the mission was completed, so I'll just give you some. Harry looked at this line of words, feeling a little amused and helpless. Is it so casual to give rewards now? Harry, Ron ran up and stopped a few steps away. He looked Harry up and down carefully. Seeing the dark circles under his eyes, he couldn't help but wonder if he didn't sleep all night last night. Good morning, Ron. Good morning, Hermione, Harry said to his friends, yawning a little, then walked quickly to the nearby dining table, grabbed an egg tart and bit into it. I'm really hungry. especially after doing physical work. Hermione looked at the time and found that there were still a few hours before class. She abandoned her plan to go to the library first. For the first time in her life, she did not go to study at this time. Instead, she sat next to Harry. She wanted to ask Harry if something happened recently. She always felt that he was not getting enough sleep and was particularly tired. Harry turned his head, his fluffy black hair changed angles with his movements. One strand of hair had grown longer and playfully rested on his straight nose bridge. Some of the hair blocked Harry's eyes. Through the hazy cover, one could see Harry's emerald green and clear eyes. Harry's thick eyelashes fought with the hair, making him feel a little itchy. The fatigue from staying up late not only did not damage Harry's temperament, but instead added a hint of laziness. Seeing Harry like this, Hermione was stunned for a moment. She opened her mouth and forgot what she wanted to say just now. Why did she feel that this guy had become handsome again? Ron was standing aside and saw that something was wrong with the atmosphere. He immediately squeezed in between Harry and Hermione and pushed Hermione aside. "Brother, did you go for a night swim last night?" Ron asked. "Well, if you want to put it that way, yes," Harry mumbled, because his mouth was stuffed with bread and sausage. Ron got an expected answer and confirmed his guess. After all, he woke up quite early, but Harry's quilt was neatly covered and very cold inside. "Then where did you go? You didn't even call me." Ron complained, "You didn't go if I didn't call you." Harry stared at Ron, who was squeezing over with a teasing look. Ron scratched his head, remembering that recently he had followed Harry out for a run at night every few days, but he found that Harry was just exploring something in the castle and there was nothing interesting, so he stopped following him. Hey, Ron was about to skip this topic. Chapter 82. Restrictions. Here, Snape followed Dumbledore to his office. Looking at the old man who did not notice anything unusual about him, he suppressed his anger. He said that he was his most trusted subordinate, but in fact he didn't even know that he was replaced again and again. Somewhat reluctant to tell Dumbledore what he knew, Snape recalled what Bayou had said to him in his Sea of Consciousness, saying that he would obey Harry's will and be controlled. What a joke! Even Voldemort in the past could not completely control him, and Dumbledore could not see his heart clearly. How could a little Harry master such advanced magic? Password. The dozing stone beast yawned. He had stayed up late for the past few days and played with some cavalrymen in the castle. He just returned to his job and was still a little sleepy because he had been working all night. He looked at the two people walking towards him with hazy eyes, feeling a little impatient. "Can anyone enter the principal's office casually? Mr. Principal." This stone beast was arrogant at first but respectful later. A fawning temperament appeared on the face of such a good stone statue. After he opened his eyes, he saw the principal walking towards him and the black-faced professor following behind him, and he jumped aside awkwardly. Dumbledore smiled at him good-naturedly, as if the words just now had never been said. The stone beast breathed a sigh of relief. The two of them walked up the mountain, and Dumbledore asked as they walked, "Is there something you want to tell me? Did you know that I went to a new place these days?" Snape asked. "Yeah, I know. It seems like you're not doing very well." Dumbledore sat on his chair, propped himself up with his hands, and looked at Snape, whose face had darkened again, with a smile. "Okay, Severus, where have you been?" Dumbledore's expression began to become serious, but he was still holding a glass of orange juice in his hand. He had eaten a little salty breakfast, so now he wanted to quench his thirst. This action was completely inconsistent with the serious expression on his face. Snape wanted to say that he had arrived at a strange place. Harry seemed to be controlled by someone and forced to do some bad things. There was some power above them that they could not resist with their current abilities. But what he said turned into, "I got bored of staying in Hogwarts, so I found someone to take a few classes for me and went out to hang out with a new girlfriend I just met." How was it? Was that person's disguise skill good? Snape said these words with an expressionless face, which were completely inconsistent with his character, and even surprised himself. Snape covered his mouth, his expression filled with disbelief and a little anger and fear in his heart. What kind of powerful force was this? Dumbledore spurted out the orange juice in his mouth in one breath, giving Snape's face a juice bath. The dozing portraits hanging around immediately became noisy and chattering. Snape wiped the moisture off his face with his hands expressionlessly, then produced a piece of paper and a pen, and the ink-filled feather pen began to slide quickly on the paper. Dumbledore took a closer look and saw that it said, I have been to many places, and also visited your old lover." Snape also saw this passage on the paper, and immediately took back the quill, took the paper in his hand, pinched it tightly, and put it in his pocket. Snape walked over to the pensieve again, pointed at Dumbledore, then pointed at his own head, wanting to extract his memories into the pensieve so that Dumbledore could see them for himself. Dumbledore had just recovered from his previous remarks and saw Snape's actions, so he immediately took action. However, just as he raised his old wand to extract Snape's memory, it was immediately bounced back by a force. Dumbledore clenched his fists under the table. The portrait of the principal on the wall also began to realize that something was wrong, and stopped making the noisy noise and became quiet. "You can't tell me, can you?" Snape didn't answer, but he nodded. A voice kept telling him not to tell this to anyone. When he wanted to tell it, a fear of death immediately arose in his heart. Dumbledore began to think about Harry's current situation. Is Harry in the same situation? He sighed heavily, frowned, and waved his hand to signal Snape to go down. He turned to look at the wall behind his chair, his expression serious. "What do you think, Tom?" A figure slowly emerged from behind the wall. He was wearing the school robe of a Hogwarts student. He was handsome, with black hair, a tall figure, and an outstanding temperament, but there was no shadow under his feet. Snape walked out of the office angrily, wanting to seek an explanation from Harry, but in all his years as a teacher, he had never personally gone to find a student. Snape suppressed his anger and casually pulled a student who looked familiar. "Go to Gryffindor and help me call Harry Potter out. Tell him to come to the potions office to find me immediately." Cedric was leisurely holding his textbook, preparing to go to class, but was suddenly called into action by Professor Snape. "Professor," Cedric wanted to tell him that he had classes to attend, but he was suddenly frostbitten by the cold air emanating from Snape's body, so he shut up. He was worried about himself, and also about Harry. How did this guy provoke this bat? At this time, Harry was still chopping peppers in large chunks without realizing it. Looking at his slightly bulging stomach, Harry finally slowed down his breakfast. He took a sip of juice and prepared to go to the dormitory to lie down first, no, to go to Gryffindor for class, but a voice suddenly popped up in his mind. "I must ask that kid Harry, what's going on?" This familiar and kind tone made Harry drop the glass of juice in his hand onto the plate. Why could he hear what Snape said? "You said gloatingly, you can talk to Draco, so of course you can talk to your dear Professor Snape, too. I won't deprive you of this right." Harry was choked. Ron, who was sitting next to Harry, was staring blankly at the ketchup in front of him. Now that Hermione had left, should he also go to the classroom? The heavy workload these days has overwhelmed him, and the difficulty has increased dramatically. It is completely different from the homework he encountered in the first few days of school. Hearing the voice beside him, Ron quickly turned around and patted Harry's back with his hand. Chapter 83. Falling. Cedric looked at Snape's back as he walked away, then looked at the book in his hand, feeling a little embarrassed. If he went to call Harry now, he would definitely be late for class. Besides, how would he know where Harry was? Their next class was Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration class. Oh, right. Cedric suddenly had an idea. "Master," Dobby suddenly appeared in the auditorium, attracting many people's attention. Ron also turned his head curiously. Hearing this embarrassing name, Harry's toes were about to tear the floor tiles of the hall, and his cheeks turned slightly red. "Hurry up and tell me." Harry moved closer to Dobby and whispered in his ear. "Cedric from Hufflepuff suddenly came into the kitchen and found me. He asked me to tell you that Professor Snape wants you to go to his office." Dobby spoke in what he thought was a very low voice, but in fact all the young wizards around heard it. Harry felt a circle of sympathetic eyes cast on him. Harry felt like he was done, and he was. Snape found that as long as he had ill will towards Harry in his heart, his actions would be unconsciously stopped, but it would be particularly good if he could change his mind. "I want to lay a foundation for Harry's future path in potions," Snape thought so. So he planned to let Harry come to his office to process the materials all day, except for class, meals, and sleep time. Dissect the toad, wake up the snake in Harry's pocket, let him find a way to extract his venom, find a way to get the unicorn to give him a feather personally, find a way to get the centaur to deliver the most precious material of their tribe to Harry personally. Harry looked at the bloody and sticky liquid on his gloves, then looked at the big bucket of mosaic stuff next to him, and vomited unconsciously. Bai had already turned off the screen that was connected to the outside world. Harry lay on the sofa and fell asleep again, completely unaware of what kind of suffering his other self was going through. Snape also disliked the taste. Before leaving, he wanted to struggle again. "Please allow me to tell Dumbledore about this." There was unquestionable determination in Snape's tone. Harry quickened the speed of his movements, as if he didn't hear anything. With a swish, he exerted a lot of force and broke the material in his hand. Fresh juice spurted out and splashed all over Harry's face. Harry felt that the lenses of his glasses were dirty, but the cold air emanating from behind him made him dare not act rashly. Snape saw that Harry had no intention of paying attention to him, and realized that there was no room for negotiation on this matter. He slammed the door angrily and left, and assigned Harry some tasks before leaving. Harry was handling the materials in his hands, his arms were too tired to move, his muscles were sore, and as long as he moved slightly, he would shed tears of rationality, and Harry's eyes were slightly red. "I didn't sleep the whole night last night. I fought a battle and was interrogated by Dumbledore. I just finished breakfast and came to Snape's place to deal with materials. I looked at the things piled up like a mountain next to me, which emitted a foul stench." Remembering that he had to go to the herbology classroom outside the castle to take a herbology class, Harry's anger rose to the top of his head. He shook his head heavily. Why did he have to be like this? He had clearly been trying very hard to save Snape's life, and whether to sue or not was not entirely up to him. Everyone looked at him with suspicion, did not trust him, and wanted to test him. Harry suddenly felt so exhausted. He didn't know why he was working so hard. Was anyone appreciating what he did? Or was he just moving himself in vain? Dark emotions suddenly surrounded Harry, making him unable to look at the sunlight outside. In his sea of consciousness, Bai jumped up happily. This was a pleasant surprise. As long as Harry continued to think like this, one day he would stand on the same front with him, and then he would be able to help himself. Harry sat down heavily on the ground, leaning his shoulder against the short plate of iron that was used to handle the platform, but the surrounding materials were accidentally knocked over by him, scattered everywhere and fell to the ground. Here, Harry is undergoing practical training with Gryffindor, and is getting familiar with the various weapons invented by Muggles, advanced or not. As long as Gryffindor has heard of or seen them, he will try to find a way to make them. Harley was wearing a tight camouflage uniform, with a few thick strokes of oil paint on her face symbolically, and a military green hat. She was lying on the lawn, and the vibrant and green grass lifted Harley up. There were 1 or 2 sandbags in front of Harley, with a sniper rifle mounted on top, exuding a cold texture. As she was about to shoot, she suddenly felt a shock in her heart, and a bone-chilling chill slowly emanated from the bottom of her heart. She immediately got up, her shoes were covered in mud, and there were a few weeds hanging on her army green camouflage uniform. She ran into the castle, trying to find Gryffindor. She was so anxious that she didn't care about adjusting her manners. She was him. They had the same perceptions, the same life experiences, the same world structure, and the same understanding of the same problem. Something bad must have happened to make Harry so tired. Gryffindor also sensed the change in Harry's mentality, and ran out in a hurry, bumping into Harry face to face. Ouch! Harry was knocked to the ground by Gryffindor's strong body. His tailbone hit the hard stone slab. Harry frowned, it was so painful. Gryffindor quickly helped Harry up. "Excuse me, could you please take a look at what happened to Harry? Now? It's not convenient for me to go out." Gryffindor tried to talk to Harry directly, but he seemed to be closing himself off. Bai also came to this conclusion. He suddenly could not monitor Harry's movements, and his daily mental activities disappeared from his sight, but this way of disappearance really made him very happy. Bai waved his hand, and a green beam of light shot out from his palm, rushing out of this mysterious space, trying to bring Harry over, but it was bounced back by the thick black fog around Harry's own consciousness. Bai suffered some minor injuries, but laughed. In their world, the will of individual creatures is the first-order weapon, a powerful ability that is unimaginable to people in this world. When he first arrived in this world, he noticed the unexpected tenacity and strength of Harry's spirit, or in other words, at a certain point in time when he arrived, Harry was the center of this world. When Harry shifted away from the center of the world, he casually tested Harry and got the answer he wanted. "This is a good parasite, but I just hope its will can be used by me." Lying on the sofa, Harley opened her sleepy eyes, pretended that she had just woken up, and then performed a series of performances. Chapter 84. Fantasy. Harry opened his eyes and tried to see the usual screen, hoping to get support from it for his knowledge of Harry's situation, but the screen disappeared. She secretly glanced at Bai Yu, who seemed extremely happy in the distance, covered her chest with her hands, frowned, and pretended that her heart was in pain. But in fact her heart was not feeling well. She felt that the world had suddenly become dark, and she wanted to wrap herself up and return to her original state. She herself is the consciousness produced by Harry's depression. When Harry feels this way, she will only become more sensitive. Bai Yu had actually been paying attention to the movements behind him. He noticed that Harry in the distance was very uncomfortable, and he had some associations in his mind, but he still pretended to be very worried. He ran over and lamented in a pretentious manner, "I don't know what happened to Harry." He suddenly closed himself off. "I can't do anything about him." Harley got the explanation she wanted, pushed Bai Yu away, stood up suddenly, ran to the glass wall, turned around and stared at him with red eyes. Okay, I get it." Bai Yu somehow let Harry go. Obviously, his best choice at this moment was to trap Harry here and let him fall, but he was unexpectedly soft-hearted. Suddenly, flowers bloomed and the mountains were full of flowers. Suddenly, a breeze blew over, and the breeze brushed his face, as if all the beauty of the world gathered here. This is emotion? Bai Yu suddenly slapped himself hard, and his face immediately swelled up. 5 finger-like red marks suddenly appeared on his fair skin. "Bitch, what qualifications do you have to have feelings?" The huge cave collapsed, and huge boulders buried the entire cave entrance. Bursts of wailing and screaming came from inside. A small figure stood in front of the cave entrance, smelling the bloody smell emanating from it. He gently placed his hand in the crack of the stone, and the blood couldn't wait to stick to his fingers. He staggered to the restaurant. The place where the dragon noises were so loud was now in ruins. His father, who had just been communicating with him, had now turned into a pool of meat paste under a huge rock. He could not be distinguished from other dragons. Bai Yu had been cheerful just now, but now he suddenly became cold, emitting cold air as if he wanted to freeze others to death. He rushed forward quickly, trying to grab Harry and trap him here. Harry noticed the movement behind her. The special training over the past few days came in handy. With the telepathy, she could feel the approximate direction of Harry. Harley ran desperately, trying to save the closed self. Because she was the savior, it was natural for her to bear all the pain and misunderstandings, it was natural for her to be powerful, and it was even more natural for her to save others. "Stop!" Bai Yu was angry. He had never been so angry since he came to this world. He just discovered the emotions in his heart and slapped himself hard. He came to this world to destroy, not to pity others. If he pity others, who will pity himself? Bai Yu used some of the energy stolen from the system. The yellow light on his palm became stronger and gathered into a hot ball of light. Then he slapped it forward fiercely, trying to knock Harry to the ground. He felt the pain in his heart like a self-torture, tears were faintly floating in his eyes. "Please stop. If you stop, I won't hurt you anymore," the other self in Bai Yu's heart was shouting desperately. Harley's body was hit and slammed to the ground like a butterfly with broken wings, with a sense of sadness and fate. In this space, Bai Yu is the master. The runes around him are floating faintly. One of his hands emits a green light and rushes towards the sky. When he receives the news that Harry is almost done falling, he secretly breathes a sigh of relief. Seeing Harley falling to the ground, he felt distressed and wanted to help her up. Harry, lying on the ground, swallowed the blood foam rising from her throat, endured the severe pain in her back, and stood up. She thought to herself that a bone must be broken. Hearing the footsteps getting closer behind her, Harry secretly gathered all his strength, stood up, and ran forward. Harry could sense that there was a passage not far away that would lead directly to Harry. "Stop!" Bai Yu launched another attack, but he hesitated for a moment, but in that moment, Harry had already rushed many meters away. Bai Yu did not hesitate this time and smashed the attack in his hand hard at Harley's back. He would find a feng shui treasure land to bury her. No one could stop his action plan in this world, including himself. "Come on! Catch me, Harry!" Harley's back was hit by this force again, and she could clearly hear the sound of the bone breaking. As the yellow light disappeared, Harley also disappeared. Harry was curled up in a dark world at this moment. There was no light, no sound, and he could no longer sense what was happening outside. Years of experience told him that he should cheer up and eliminate the negative emotions in his heart. However, Harry felt that he had no strength left, not even the strength to stand up. Suddenly, the black mist around him turned into water, and Harry sank into the water, slumbering. His mouth unconsciously exhaled air, emitting bubbles one after another. His arms were slightly raised, and his jet black hair fluttered slightly with the flow of the water. "I'm so tired, I really want to just sleep like this. Mom, Dad, I'm here to find you." Harry suddenly felt that everything around him was bright, a warm yellow light. James Potter was supporting Lily Evans and waving at him with a smile. Next to them was Sirius Black, who was laughing, and Lupin, who was shy and reserved. Hermione smiled at him, Ron flew towards him on his broomstick, and not far away, the Veles twins were fighting. Percy was looking at them helplessly, and Cedric was walking nearby holding Cho Zhang's hand. Not far away, Dumbledore could be vaguely seen walking with another person, with a cute girl beside them. Snape stared at James Potter with a dark face. "I'm here." Harry turned back into his 9-year-old self and waved happily to his parents. His expression was full of innocence and naivety, as if he was being spoiled to the extreme. Draco, who was in class, felt a little nervous. Dobby, who was washing vegetables in the kitchen, stopped what he was doing. Snape, who was discussing herbal matters with Hagrid at the edge of the woods, felt his heart skip a beat. Dumbledore, who was sleeping in bed, woke up suddenly. He touched his pounding heart and felt that something bad had happened. Fawkes suddenly appeared, and without consulting Dumbledore, he grabbed his pajamas and took him to Professor Snape's office. As soon as Dumbledore arrived here, he saw Harry, who was dirty, unconscious, with a frown and a pale face. Dumbledore sighed and said, "Alas, it looks like he's fine, he's just tired." There were a few twitching toads under Harry's body, and unprocessed materials were scattered around. A strong fishy smell surrounded the entire office, but Harry seemed to feel nothing. Suddenly, his face became rosy, his complexion became calm, and there was a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. Dumbledore was panicking. He could feel the soul in the body in front of him moving away. Chapter 85. Exposed. On the outskirts of the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid was patrolling. Professor Dumbledore told him to check the Forbidden Forest carefully and, if possible, ask for help from the magical creatures inside to look for a stranger. In other words, if anyone other than him entered Hogwarts, they should report to him. After Hagrid finished taking care of his pet, he took his little pink umbrella and walked into the depths of the Forbidden Forest. At this time, a man wearing a black wizard robe and a hat on his head that covered most of his face appeared behind Hagrid. Half of his chin was as delicate as a baby's, and the other half was as old as an old man, with a dry mouth. He spoke, his voice sounded neither male nor female, neither old nor young. In his hand was the pink bottle that he had given to Harry to erase Draco's memory, and he quietly opened it. "It seems the seeds I planted worked." In the depths of darkness, there was silence and no sun. Harry was in a void, enjoying the warm yellow light to his heart's content, greedily enjoying everything that did not belong to him. Behind Harry, a wisp of pink smoke was going in and out of his body, but Harry did not notice it at all. Suddenly, a word came to his ears, like thunder, exploding. These words shattered all the illusions around him. The beautiful scene in front of him was like a shattered mirror, split into pieces. Harry ran forward desperately, wanting to touch them and then put them together. They all stopped moving, and their entire bodies slowly evaporated into the air like smoke. Harry seemed to hear their cries for help, "Save me! Quick! Catch me, Harry!" Harry sensed something and opened his eyes with red eyes. He had not yet recovered from the previous shattering, and he was suspended in the water that had turned from black mist. Suddenly, a girl appeared in the water, bubbles kept coming out of her nose and mouth, her skirt swayed slightly with the flow of the water, and her hair, which looked like black algae, spread out. A layer of magic film floated above her emerald eyes, allowing her to open her eyes. Harry swam to Harry's side, and following the force of the water, he suddenly crashed into his arms. He held Harry's face in his hands, and his emerald and firm eyes looked into those dull eyes. "Wake up!" Harry shouted loudly, and some blood foam unconsciously came out of her mouth, which floated to Harry's nose along the water flow. The water that turned from black mist went into Harry's mouth. The sound did not spread out, but Harry smelled the bloody smell and his eyes rolled unconsciously. When Harry saw this, she no longer cared about the pain in her body. She felt her face suddenly turned into a cooked shrimp, emitting steam. Harry swallowed the blood foam rising from his throat and began to change his behavior. She took one of Harry's hands and slapped him with the other. Hey! Harry woke up in pain, feeling the burning sensation on half of his face. The water around him suddenly turned into black mist, and Harry and his partner fell heavily to the ground. What happened to you? Feeling physically and mentally exhausted and in pain, Harry asked Harry unhappily, why did you become the same as before? I don't know either. Harry scratched his head. All the negative emotions just now seemed to disappear in an instant, and everything in his memory just now became blurry. He suddenly remembered that he still had to process materials for the professor in the interior, and he took a breath of cold air. He was doomed. What if he didn't finish processing and was discovered by Professor Snape? The pink line behind Harry gradually disappeared with Harry's arrival, and finally gradually disappeared into his own body. Here, Snape hurried to the school infirmary and looked at the two people standing inside glaring at him. He suddenly felt powerless as if yellow mud was falling off his crotch. This was really the case. Even if Professor Dumbledore just opened his mouth and said 2 words, he felt the fatigue and tension of Snape who hurried over, so he sighed and motioned him to come inside. Harry visited the school infirmary again. This time he put on his most familiar hospital gown and lay on his most familiar bed. This year was truly a year of disasters. There was not a single good day. Snape saw the weak Harry and became anxious, that man must have done something to Harry again. As soon as he opened his mouth, he found that he seemed to be out of control. When Dumbledore realized that Snape was about to say something, he asked Madame Pomfrey to leave and cast dozens of spells on the entire school infirmary to prevent others from eavesdropping. Snape opened his mouth in surprise, and found that he seemed to be able to reveal something relevant, and he couldn't help but show his joy. He's at Harry's. Snape was afraid of being controlled again, so he chose to express some sensitive words with gestures. He took a few steps forward and pointed his finger at Harry's head. Dumbledore's expression remained unchanged, but his heart was in turmoil. What kind of evil ancient magic could control Harry? He comes from another. Just as Snape was about to say the word world when a sense of crisis that he had never experienced before arose in his heart. Even when he was working under Voldemort and was nearly injured by him accidentally, and an avatar rushed past his ear, he did not have this feeling. It was a fear of being looked down upon by a giant, a natural awe that food has for predators, and a fear that was engraved in his genes and in his bones after thousands of years of reincarnation. When he realized that this taboo could not be touched, Snape chose to tell something else. Mission, Snape pointed at himself, complete, reward, punishment, soul. With his clever brain, Dumbledore seemed to understand something and understood the many strange things about Harry. There must be someone in Harry's head controlling him, forcing him to complete certain things. If he doesn't, his soul will be damaged as a punishment, Dumbledore secretly speculated. No wonder Harry is always sick. He gave up the plan that he had hidden in his heart for a long time. After destroying Voldemort's Horcrux, he would calmly reunite with his family. Now it is impossible. Harry still needs a strong backing. The entire wizarding world will face a crisis greater than Voldemort. What does this thing lurking in Harry's head want to do? Is it related to the prophecy? Even he had never heard of this kind of magic. Dumbledore thought again of the letter that Grindelwald had written to him at the beginning of the school year. He originally thought that it was just an excuse for him to meet with him in collaboration, but now that he thought about it, there was a high probability that it would happen. Dumbledore walked forward, touched Harry's head with his big hand, and sighed heavily, "It's really hard for you." Chapter 86. Doubt. Harry woke up and walked out of the black fog, and by use contact with the outside world began to resume. He had no idea that in just a short period of time, due to Harry's mental weakness and his own negligence, someone outside had already revealed half of his background. He looked at the two people supporting each other, smiled coldly, turned around and left. Harry looked at Harley guiltily and secretly clenched his fists. This Bayou would drive him out of his mind sooner or later, so that he would never find a place to parasitize and he would never be able to control him again. "It's all my fault," Harry lowered his brows, his tone full of self-blame. "It's not your fault," Harry said gently, "but you have to be careful. This sudden situation is probably not an accident. You are being schemed by someone. But it shouldn't be by you this time. Think about it carefully. Is there anything else happening around you?" Harry thought about it carefully. Since Dumbledore asked him to remove the counter curse of the invisible sharpness, but did not go to Snape. He knew that Snape had probably been exposed. When the real Professor Snape went out and Dumbledore did not show any abnormality, this further confirmed his guess. This person is the number one suspect. His origin is uncertain, and his methods are powerful and changeable. When he invaded Hogwarts, the pink smoke in his hand was really frightening. It is definitely the strongest weapon for mass attack. Associating with such a person is no different from dancing with a snake. In addition, Voldemort, who Quirrell mentioned disappearing, was also a big suspect. Judging from the time, Voldemort definitely had enough time to get here and lurk. Judging from the magic of the attack, Harry felt that he must have been tricked. Who could sneak into Hogwarts and cast such a strange and vicious magic? Voldemort was very likely. Also, there are actually some people hidden deep in Harry's heart, some people he is unwilling to explore in depth. Ron's origins are a mystery, and he is definitely not the innocent red-haired little boy in his previous life. Hagrid's style is also very different from that of his previous life. He has been at the scene when Ron had the accident. And then there were the snakes that suddenly appeared next to him. They acted as if they were very familiar with him and talked about his future. Harry did not object on the surface, but in fact he was still somewhat wary of them. It should be impossible for Aben to do that. After all, it was injured so badly for him. Harry thought as he helped Harry to the sofa, "You should have a good rest first." When he passed by you, he didn't even glance at him, and was as cold as if this person didn't exist. The relationship between them had already been torn apart and the fight had begun. There was no need to pretend to be nice. He didn't have the ability to compete with him now. Harry turned his head to look at Harry's weak body and fragile face, and a nameless anger rose up. Bayou felt empty inside, he didn't know what he was regretting. Originally, their relationship was not that of friends, but of enemies. They knew it all, were on guard against each other, and used each other. The bickering between them was just for the sake of peace. Bayou suddenly felt a pain on his cheek. It was Harry who controlled his fist and punched him with a fierce wind. Bayou also saw the miserable state of Harry's body. Although he did not achieve his goal and should be angry, he felt guilty. For a reason he was unwilling to admit, he silently endured Harry's punch without saying a word. Harry raised his eyebrows in surprise, looking at this usually elegant nobleman, with disheveled hair and bruised cheeks, enduring his punches without resistance. Although he was a little surprised, don't expect him to forgive him. Harry found that he had some control. Sometimes he could temporarily block Bayou's detection of the outside world, prevent him from acquiring his own mental activities, and resist his control over his soul. After Harry recovered, Snape released him and decided not to embarrass him anymore, but he still mocked him, saying that he was a fragile paper man. Dumbledore was still as usual, sometimes strolling to the edge of the Forbidden Forest to check on the person who suddenly appeared, but he didn't seem to be in a hurry. Harry had originally imagined that Dumbledore would explore the cause of his sudden coma, and he had thought of all kinds of excuses to fool him, but Dumbledore didn't mention it. He just waved his hand and, except for retaining his Quidditch and potions classes, he would give him lessons whenever he had time, or call his other teacher over and the two of them would take turns to give him extra lessons. Harry is now miserable. The original difficulty of the class was as simple as 1 + 1 in primary school, but now it has to be turned into university-level advanced mathematics and physics, and he is taught knowledge that he has never learned in his previous life. As soon as he opened his eyes during the day, he had to study the profound magical knowledge. From time to time, he would be beaten up by Dumbledore and Snape. Except for lunchtime and sleeping time, he had to go into the Gryffindor space to complete the learning of double knowledge. Harley was hurt by Bayou the last time she went to wake him up, and she was in a bad mental state. It would take a long time for her to recover, so he could only learn everything on Harley's schedule, including dancing, playing various musical instruments and singing. Harry looked at the pink ballet skirt, white stockings and dancing shoes on his body, suppressed his urge to get angry, and glared at Harry who was gloating beside him. Harry had to heal her wounds, so she soaked in the black lake in the space, wearing a magic tool that allowed her to float, and looked at Harry with a teasing look at the stiff movements. She covered her mouth with her hands from time to time. Although the laughter did not come out of her mouth, it jumped out happily from Harley's emerald and bright eyes. Seeing Harry smile, Harry's tense expression suddenly relaxed. If it could make her happy, it would be fine. But, what about the big guy next to him? You. Stop laughing. What are you laughing at? If you really want to go to class so badly, you might as well dance yourself. Gryffindor started laughing secretly, but after Harry finished speaking, he started laughing heartily. This hearty laughter attracted some teachers in the castle to stick their heads out curiously. Harry was so scared. Just now only 3 people knew about it. Now what if so many people saw him like this? How could he attend classes in the future? Okay, I won't tease you anymore. Gryffindor stopped his laughter, but I'm professionally trained, and I won't laugh unless I can't help it. After saying this, Gryffindor ignored Harry's stabbing eyes behind him and walked into the castle while laughing, bending down from time to time. Ha 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 ha. The hearty laughter spread to every corner. Here, Ron and Hermione came to Snape's office door together. They were going to put him in detention. The two looked at each other. Who will come? Please. Ron made a gesture of invitation to Hermione. It is a gentleman's courtesy to a lady. No, please. Students who are fast at mastering potions should show basic humility to those who are a little slower. Hermione said with a smile. Chapter 87. God's Son. Ron looked at Hermione for some reason, turned around and knocked on the door. Professor, we're here. Please come in. Ron and Hermione pushed the door open and saw Professor Snape with a serious expression on his face. He was holding a red feather pen in his hand and writing something fiercely on a pile of papers in front of him. Ron swallowed, and the nervousness he felt when he was about to achieve his results in his previous life suddenly reappeared. Professor Snape didn't say anything, as if he wanted to leave them alone, but in fact his mind was working rapidly. Judging from the situation in the past few days, it was impossible for these two guys to enter his office for no reason. But I don't know what punishment the faker gave them. If the front and back don't match, there might be some problems. Never mind, what I say is what it is. Did you see it? Professor Snape looked up and pointed to the pile of potion materials on the table next to him. Just follow what you learned in your textbooks. Cut the purple ones into small pieces about the size of a sugar cube, and cut the blue ones into long strips about the same length as your middle finger. Snape gave the instruction calmly, and then continued to mark the homework in his hand, as if he saw a very angry essay. The sharp tip of the pen slid across the paper, making a loud noise. Seems to be a P. Ron thought to himself. Hermione had already started to act. She walked to the table and said, I'll take care of the purple ones. Hurry up and get to work. Stop staring. Here I come, why don't you keep your voice down? Ron responded cowardly. Snape heard the conversation between the two little wizards, raised his eyebrows in surprise, looked at them with amusement, and then continued to complete the work at hand. Snape didn't realize that he had become very peaceful since he came out, and the hostility he carried in him had basically disappeared. Although his face was still expressionless, everyone who had been with him could feel his peace and tranquility. One day, Snape called Harry to his office and asked a question that made no sense, can the other you come out? Or tell me what kind of help you need, and you can come to me. Looking at the shocked expression on Harry's face, Snape smiled and tried his best to look kindest. If you don't mind, I can be your godfather. Harry almost couldn't support himself when he heard this voice. What was going on? The person who seemed to hate him the most in his previous life was going to be his godfather in this life. Okay, although it was only a superficial dislike, he was James Potter's son. Did he forget the hurt the professor had suffered? That's because of me. Don't be so narcissistic. Harley said coldly, making her presence known. Harry was shocked, Harry suddenly realized, and Harry was extremely happy. Hee, but Harry clearly refused. A godfather can only have one godson. Although this rule is not strictly enforced in the wizarding world, this behavior is undoubtedly harmful to the other godson, Draco. What are you worried about? Snape immediately became unhappy. What about Draco? Snape hesitated, remembering the boy. Draco, thank you. He suddenly felt that his thoughts were a bit too impulsive and he regretted it a bit. Since he adopted Draco as his godson, he should take responsibility for him instead of just acting on his own wishful thinking. He would not ask Draco about this child. Because he knew that no matter from which perspective, at home and at school, his status was naturally higher than Draco's. His direct questioning was actually equivalent to oppression. On the surface, it seemed that he respected the child's wishes, but in fact, the child was forced to make a choice that went against his heart due to the oppression of his class. Snape waved his hand, signaling Harry to leave, exuding a frustrated aura. Snape couldn't do it, but Dumbledore had ideas about it. Since he knew these things, he felt a dull pain in his heart. How old was Harry? He had to endure so many things every day, and he forced him to sign the contract when he was at his most vulnerable. Now that I think about it, I don't seem to be much of a human being. So Dumbledore wanted to make it up to Harry. With a wave of his hand, he exempted Harry from the final exams for his first year, as well as tests from other professors. In order to ensure the fairness of teaching and in order not to show that Harry is special, he spread the word a few weeks in advance that students with excellent grades in each grade can take the final exams in advance, and those who pass will have the right to attend classrooms of different grades. At the same time, Hogwarts will certify their excellent results and inform the British wizarding world. This actually ensures that some talented wizards do not waste their talents, thereby stimulating their potential. In order to prevent some young wizards from causing trouble and breaking this rule, Dumbledore also added a restriction that each subject must be confirmed by its teacher before taking the early final exams. After hearing the news, those who felt that they had excellent grades were all excited. They were eager to try and start the exam in advance. If they passed, it would be something worth showing off. At the same time, they could broaden their knowledge and get certification from the school, which was very helpful for children from ordinary families in finding jobs. On the same morning as the news was heard, the new rules for Hogwarts exams were published in the Daily Prophet, making them known to the public. That evening, wizard parents who learned of the news, as long as they had great confidence in their children, wrote letters to encourage their children to sign up. Every teacher's office was crowded with little wizards, good and not so good, some coming to hand in homework, some completing confinement, some applying, and some asking about the difficulty of questions and the scope of exams, and the noise gave the professors a headache. The beginning of every new thing is accompanied by inevitable arguments, challenges, repeated confirmations and measurements. The veins on Snape's temples bulged, but facing the young wizards who filled the office, he suppressed his anger. He thought of Harry's weak body and the little information he had gained from Harry's sea of consciousness. In today's wizarding world, it is necessary to select top talents and cultivate top combat power in order to better cope with this situation. On this point, he and Dumbledore reached a tacit understanding, and told the professors in another way, asking them to cooperate. Not only for Harry, but also for the survival of the entire wizarding world. Dumbledore is not in Hogwarts now. He first plans to visit various magic academies in Europe and use his influence and power to discuss this decision with the principals. At the same time, Dumbledore also reached out to the Ministry of Magic. The Minister of Magic, who was worried that he would lose his position, had his nightmare come true. Chapter 88. Assessment. After Harry received the newspaper of the day, he closed it immediately, tried his best to avoid the discussions of the little wizards around him, pretended to be normal, stayed away from the crowded crowd, and prevented Bayou from analyzing something from these things. In order to ensure the freedom of his thoughts, he wanted to recreate the situation on that day when the black fog blocked the investigation, so he asked Gryffindor to keep him busy during this period so that he could chat with him in his mind. Gryffindor changed his usual lazy attitude, as he knew the importance of this matter. Harley understood what Harry meant tacitly. She took advantage of Bayou's guilt for hurting her and kept chattering, telling Bayou what Harry wanted him to know, subtly influencing his way of thinking. Bayou was fooled as expected. In his world, communication and thinking between people were not so complicated. If he was good at planning, he would not have exposed his purpose and unfriendly attitude in such a short time. He could obviously cover it up, but he didn't know whether he was disdainful or didn't know. Oh, as expected, people, Bayou said sarcastically, always have their own selfish desires, and are always controlled by their own selfish desires. They even have to use high-sounding excuses to make themselves feel at ease in their selfish pursuits. Even Dumbledore is no exception, he said with some disappointment. I thought he would be a consistent person, but I didn't expect that he would still let his inner thoughts affect his work. Dumbledore met with Quirrell alone. To be more precise, he made Quirrell believe that Dumbledore would meet with every professor individually. I want Harry to finish his first semester early and give him special tutoring, but he lives in a large group after all, so he can't be too conspicuous. Dumbledore looked up at Quirrell. He had different opinions for each professor and had his own suspicions about the man who had been possessed by Voldemort and was now close to Harry. Quirrell met Dumbledore's eyes and understood what Dumbledore meant. Did he want him to let Harry off the hook? How could he dare to do that? How could he dare to embarrass his master? On the night when the exam papers came out, he called Harry to his office on the pretext that he needed his help and wanted him to take a look at the papers in advance. Harry refused, and Harry finished the paper in front of him. Quirrell took a look and found that most of it was correct. As for dueling, he didn't think he was a match for his master, so he didn't mention it. "Well, Professor, Harry has already taken the exam and got full marks. I was planning to report to you again in a while." Quirrell smiled flatteringly. Dumbledore couldn't bear to watch how this outstanding wizard from Ravenclaw had become like this. But at the same time, Dumbledore was stunned. He thought of Professor McGonagall. When Professor Cat heard his reason at first, she rejected him and shortened the amount of candy he could get this week. Dumbledore looked at Lemon Snowball, who was moving away from him with a look of reluctance. "How can you do this for just one person? This is unfair to the other young wizards. Besides, Harry has passed my test with full marks." "What do you mean? Don't you trust Harry?" Professor McGonagall became more and more angry as she spoke. The more Dumbledore listened, the shorter his body became, and he almost collapsed on the chair. "How about we make this assessment available to the entire grade and young wizards from all colleges?" Dumbledore went with the flow. After hearing this, Professor Meowth thought about it and agreed. Dumbledore breathed a sigh of relief and began to discuss the details with the professor. Back to the present, Dumbledore looked at Quirrell in front of him embarrassedly, not knowing how to start. That's good, that's good. What should he say? Let Quirrell continue to do what he was doing next, which would not seem so abrupt and logical, so that Quirrell could not guess his original purpose. "Do any other students know about this?" Dumbledore asked again, trying to find some loopholes. Quirrell thought about it. He himself was quite secretive in doing this, but Harry couldn't help but tell the people around him. The news of the principal skipping grades was widely circulated in the school. "Quite a lot," Quirrell chose his words carefully. "Then you should tell all the students about this. Don't let Harry look too different. It's not good for her," Dumbledore said with a smile, his tone full of unquestionable determination. Quirrell accepted this explanation, but he still felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. However, soon, the news from the Arnia forest attracted all his attention. Apart from completing the task assigned to him by Dengbulu, he had no time to think about what was happening behind the scenes. Professor Dumbledore followed suit and consulted with several professors in turn. As expected, all of them agreed. Some even didn't even listen to him. They just did what he said and didn't need a reason to explain why they did so. Dumbledore was ashamed. He had no time to think about it. He immediately went to another school to discuss these matters with the principal. The enthusiasm of all the young wizards was aroused. After all, the temptation was too great. As long as they could take the final exams ahead of time, they would not have to complete their homework. After all, Harry, who had taken the final exams ahead of time, was an example. He had already completed the final exams of several courses. According to information revealed by someone from Gryffindor who wished to remain anonymous, Harry had been sleeping soundly in the dormitory every day after his classes. Of course, not many young wizards were willing to believe this. After all, it was more likely that such an outstanding wizard would be secretly curling up in the dormitory. They all felt that this was information leaked by someone in order to relax their vigilance. Those that should curl up are still curled up, and those that should lie flat are still lying flat. Most of the Hufflepuff students live in their own little world, focusing on the delicious food, occasionally raising their heads to take a look at the noisy surroundings, and then lowering their heads, launching a fierce attack on the food on the plate. Some people in Slytherin scoffed at this kind of reward, but some others were jealous. If a prefect did not have enough strength to convince others, then he would not have the position. Ravenclaw was still immersed in his own world of knowledge, but most of them were attracted by the condition that allowed them to audit other classrooms. They thought they were particularly outstanding and had already run to the professor's office to inquire about the difficulty and scope of the questions. Seeing that the Slytherins were eager to try, the Gryffindors were not willing to be outdone. Some of those who were recognized as having good academic performance were also urged to take the exam in advance. Hermione was one of them. However, some little wizards were soon hit. Because it was approved by the professor, he asked everyone to test their level in front of him, which discouraged most people. The professor gave everyone a fair chance, but not everyone seized it. Chapter 89. Cowboy. Draco, are you confident? Pansy looked at the crowded crowd on the podium, and at Draco sitting calmly in his seat, and was curious about how confident he was. "Well, there are some," Draco said modestly, but his tone was full of pride, with his chin slightly raised, like a white peacock spreading its tail. Pansy got the answer from his face, and an impulse arose in her heart. "Everyone, be quiet and go back to your seats." Professor McGonagall felt a headache as she looked at the noisy little wizards below. In the next period of time, he would have to explain the rules in detail to each class, and the person who brought up this matter might be drinking coffee leisurely with some headmaster right now. The young wizards kept their mouths shut due to the long-established authority of Professor McGonagall. Most of those gathered there were Slytherin students, with one or two Hufflepuff wizards occasionally standing on the periphery, listening once or twice, and then sitting back in their seats. Draco glanced at the indifferent Hufflepuff and sighed helplessly. It was like this in his previous life, and it was almost the same in this life. "I believe you have learned about this exam from various channels. Many young wizards want to give it a try, but I still need to make the rules clear. Here, everyone has one chance to take the exam. It's not an exam, but a qualification to take the exam." Professor McGonagall looked serious and glanced at the little wizard who was sitting down. "The first grade is divided into theoretical and practical exams. The format and scope of the exams are similar to the final exams. You must master the ability to turn matches into silver needles, and Draco's thoughts flew away. As far as he knew, these were just small cases for him and Harry. After learning that Harry had passed several courses, he had already planned to finish his studies early this year. However, his progress was a little slower than Harry's. He looked at Professor McGonagall above him, his eyes showing a determination to win. Inside the Defense Against the Dark Arts office, Quirrell was sitting at his seat. He had just seen off a large group of students who had poured in. Looking at the piles of homework under his hands, as well as the tasks assigned to him by his master, he felt a bit overwhelmed. Now there was a moment of silence, and he began to think about this sudden action. He always felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what it was. It seems that there is a similar stratification in the Muggle world. Those Muggle elementary school students will start an exam in advance and then enter a long period of study. During this period, they do not have to take exams like ordinary students. They are talents specially trained for national construction. His national construction, what good is there to build in this broken wizarding world? According to his observation and understanding, during this period of teaching, the entire teaching atmosphere of Hogwarts was very relaxed, and a happy education was pursued, which was very different from the atmosphere when he was in school. This was all due to Dumbledore's tolerance of the young wizards. But Quirrell disagrees. In other words, in the British wizarding world, only parents who are particularly confident in their children and believe that they have strong self-control and planning will send them to Hogwarts. Although Hogwarts has the most powerful teaching resources in the British wizarding world, the educational principles pursued by the new headmaster after taking office make the students who grow up here very happy, but the probability of becoming a powerful wizard is very small. So, are we getting nervous now? Quirrell seemed to understand Dumbledore's purpose, and thinking back to his trips to various schools, he became more certain of his thoughts, not knowing that he had just missed the truth. It was that thought at that moment that was his real purpose. And Voldemort, yeah, really. Quirrell was confused by this man's whereabouts and he always felt like he was being fooled. The person Quirrell was looking for had been in Hogwarts for a long time. No one knew what he had secretly done in there, and no one noticed his arrival. If Voldemort wanted to sneak into a place quietly and hide there quietly, not many people would find him, unless Dumbledore was only a finger away from him. But as long as Voldemort paid a little attention, it would not be impossible. Time flies. With the promulgation of this measure, some qualified young wizards began to prepare for the exam intensively, but this did not affect the 5th grade students' need to take the ordinary wizard level exam, and the 7th grade graduates must pass the ultimate wizard level exam. Harry continued his orderly study career. He played Quidditch when he had time and attended classes in the offices of various classrooms at night. With Professor Dumbledore's approval, he prepared for the exams on his own and did not have to go to class. Although in the eyes of outsiders, he still stayed in the dormitory and slept soundly every day, Harry sighed when he heard countless voices of dissuasion coming to his ears. It was his own fault that he had no way to explain the situation clearly. He immediately moved the class location to the room of requirement on the 8th floor. He looked at this place he had not been to for a long time and missed it a little. The mural of the giant hanging in the corridor, the giant's eyes glanced down, as if asking you why you didn't come? The giant stick in his hand moved slightly, and finally fell to the floor above the mural with a click. Harry rubbed his nose and muttered to himself, "I need a quiet place, I need a quiet place." Suddenly, a door appeared on the wall. His heart shook with the appearance of the door. The same was true for Bai Yu. He always felt that this place looked familiar, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Harry pushed the door open and walked in. He paused and glanced back. The corridor on the 8th floor was quiet. It was class time and most of the young wizards were in class. He observed the Marauder's map and saw that Peeves was still making trouble in the kitchen, and other ghosts were scattered around the castle. Then why did he always feel like someone was watching him from behind? Harry stood at the door again, staring around silently, trying to find a flaw in the silence. "What are you doing? It's time for class," Gryffindor reminded. Harry gave up the idea and walked away, closing the door behind him. After he closed the door and it disappeared, a man walked out from a blind spot in the corridor. He was wearing a leather jacket, brown marten boots, and tight jeans. He was full of the heroism of the Great Western Desert, but his eyes revealed a look that did not match his temperament, full of curiosity and gloom. Chapter 90. Fight. Quirrell, who was correcting homework in the classroom, suddenly felt a familiar feeling, as if it was another self. The mysterious response from somewhere made him so anxious that he couldn't calm down at all. What on earth was it? He was messing around in the castle, heard Snape's voice mocking others, heard McGonagall's harsh criticism, and walked into the library. The quiet study atmosphere made him nervous, and suddenly there was a laugh from a distance, and a stench that hit him in the face. It was the two guys from Veles fighting with Peeves, and then there was Filch's angry roar. As Quirrell walked, he came to the Hufflepuff kitchen, a place he had heard of but never been to. He came in with a Hufflepuff student named Cedric. He had an impression of this student, who had good grades and a very handsome face. Quirrell touched his face uncomfortably, well, just as handsome as he was, but his skin was a little rough. Quirrell took the small cake that the elf enthusiastically stuffed into his hands, took a bite, and the sour and sweet feeling filled his taste buds, which relaxed his nervous mood. He was going to stroll in the castle, and for the first time because of this opportunity, he took a close look at the place where he had lived for many years. It's just that the spiral staircase inside is too annoying. Quirrell stood halfway up the staircase, watching it twisting this way and that and unwilling to stay in the right place. He stomped on it hard with his feet. This almost used up all his strength, but it seemed like a tickle to the staircase. Instead, it spun even more happily. Looking at the rotating environment and the students appearing at the entrance of the corridor, Quirrell felt that he was about to lose face. He used a spell on the ground, and then floated in the air. At the same time, he cast a transformation spell on the book of one of the lucky little wizards, turning it into a long zipline, so that it could hang on the upper floors of the castle. After Quirrell left, the staircase obediently placed itself in the correct position, as if the rotation just now was not done by him. The little wizards around looked at the professor who was leaping into the air with admiration. At this time, Filch chased the three troublemakers in front of him and rushed out of the corridor, wanting to go down the stairs. However, he did not expect to see the professor performing magic openly in the corridor. Filch looked through the school rules in his memory, and there didn't seem to be a rule that professors were not allowed to use. While he was stunned, Peeves had casually slipped into a corridor and disappeared, while the Veles twins blended into the crowd. Although their hair was conspicuous, the crowd concealed their figures. They all looked at the administrator who loved to arrest people with a common hatred. Filch left helplessly. Quirrell was now complaining bitterly. There seemed to be something wrong with the transfiguration spell he had cast. The rope was not hanging at the bottom but at the top. Although he looked very cool now, he was actually not sure when he would fall from mid-air and fall upside down, and would not be able to maintain his dignity in front of the little wizard. He reached the 8th floor safely, but the small cake in his hand fell to the ground. He looked at the lucky guy, whose red hair was covered with white cream. This was not done by me, you should find another victim." Quirrell threw the book handsomely to the little wizard who was still waiting there, but the little wizard didn't appreciate it. This professor was too crazy. His next class was Professor McGonagall's, and he was almost late. The little wizard ran away, and Quirrell thought he ran away because he was moved by his handsome figure. When he reached the 8th floor, he felt a familiar feeling, which was one of the reasons that prompted him to leave his office and wander in the corridor. He followed his sixth sense and slowly moved closer. As he got closer, he finally saw a rugged man. He came face to face with him and they looked at each other in bewilderment. In this strange face, he saw a familiar soul, and the throbbing from the depths of his soul slowly stabilized. The man greeted him in a friendly manner. Quirrell raised his hand stupidly and waved at the stranger. Then he realized that judging from the man's age, he should not be a student. He knew all the professors, and Hogwarts did not have any activities to receive visitors recently. "Who are you?" Quirrell raised his wand vigilantly. "I am you." The man smiled at him in a friendly manner, but behind the smile Quirrell saw a bloody mouth that seemed about to swallow him. He took 2 steps back in fear. After all, it was the other world that gave him the confidence. How could a predator be afraid of its prey? Besides, the master was still here. The man frowned, feeling that something was not right. Even though the man's face was Quirrell's and his soul was almost the same, it still felt different. He moved the soul that contained Qi Luo in his body, and looked at the reaction of the other person. He stared at him with an innocent expression. No, not innocent. He raised the wand in his hand higher and higher, and the tip of the wand was pointed at his throat. "That's not right, why is there no reaction?" Voldemort thought. He somehow escaped in the first place, even though a small part of his soul was lost, but it's not like he had never split before, and he also had an unexpected surprise. He found that there was actually a small part of him in Harry's body. Just think of it as another Horcrux in storage. When he escaped, he had inquired about the current situation of the defense against the dark arts teacher at Hogwarts, and it was still Quirrell. At first he thought that Dumbledore had sent someone to impersonate the teacher due to future teacher recruitment plans. Just now, he met Quirrell face to face, and the soul was indeed very familiar, and so was the face. Even legilimency didn't work on him. His own magic on the soul seemed to have no effect on this man. Voldemort secretly thought that this was not good. He had originally planned to control him first, lurk beside Harry, and... As soon as Voldemort had the evil thought in his mind, he felt a heart-wrenching pain. It was that familiar feeling again. Quirrell looked at the man in front of him, feeling somewhat puzzled. Suddenly, a description of the missing Muggle flashed through his mind. He also seemed so out of place, as if he was also wearing denim-type clothes. In a flash, Quirrell took advantage of the man's change of mind and quickly imprisoned him. The sound of magic, or perhaps the fighting instinct hidden deep in his heart, allowed Voldemort to escape the attack. He stared angrily at the man in front of him. The rationality in his heart told him to quickly erase this person's memory, and the burning anger in his heart told him to quickly give this person an Avada. No one had ever dared to disrespect him like this. The split soul turned Voldemort's sanity into a pool of stagnant water and a few broken pieces of debris. Chapter 91. Catch. It is definitely not that simple for someone to become a Dark Lord, even if he has torn his soul into pieces. His best option now is to carry out the original plan, use the Imperious Curse to control the Professor, and then erase his memory. The worst option is to make this person stupid or make him disappear. Voldemort looked at him with an evaluating look in his eyes, which made Quirrell feel a little creepy. If his guess was correct, this person was the one he had been looking for a long time. Seeing Voldemort on full alert, looking at him tentatively and warily, Quirrell secretly cried out inwardly. He was almost controlled by Voldemort just now. As long as he was hardened a little, he would know everything. Quirrell was sweating profusely. He was afraid of Dumbledore, so don't expect him to be brave against Voldemort. The idea of catching him and making a contribution suddenly disappeared. It would be better to leave this matter to Dumbledore or his master. Qi Luo took a few steps back, and the wand in his hand kept following Voldemort closely. Voldemort originally planned to end the battle quickly, or in other words, encountering Quirrell was a later step in his plan. He was now on the 8th floor, very close to Dumbledore's office, but he heard that the old man had gone out and had not returned for a long time. The two of them were in a stalemate. Quirrell was alert to the possible spells of the silencing wand around him and cast an armor to protect himself. Voldemort stared at Quirrell's head and the barrier around him, wanting to continue with his plan. Quirrell was becoming more and more relaxed, while Voldemort was sweating profusely. The longer he stayed, the less beneficial it would be for him. Ding ding ding, after hearing the footsteps, Voldemort acted decisively, and while Quirrell was attracted by the footsteps, he cast a stunning spell on Quirrell silently. He relaxed for a moment, and the defensive spell had a loophole, so Quirrell was hit, and lay softly on the ground. His last consciousness was still a little regretful. He fell into the hands of such a big devil, and I think he would not have a good end. Voldemort looked at Quirrell, who was lying on the ground with a smug look on his face. Although he could not kill him or control him now, he could make him disappear for a period of time and control him during that time, just like he controlled the previous Quirrell. We have to take advantage of this time to drag him away. Since apparate is not allowed in Hogwarts, he can just stay in the Forbidden Forest. This is what Voldemort thought and planned to do. He planned to put Harry's matter aside and solve the most pressing problem first. What a pity, Mr. Voldemort, I think you may have to change your plans a little. Voldemort felt something hard pressing against his waist. He turned around stiffly and felt his body suddenly become cold. The strange figure lying on the ground gradually disappeared. The footsteps were getting closer. It was Filch and his kitten. For some reason, they were patrolling on the 8th floor. Looking at the administrator getting closer and closer, Voldemort had an evil idea in his mind. He could also find another person to control, or use as a handle to blackmail him. Seeing this person getting closer and closer, Voldemort secretly rejoiced. Harry took the initiative and cast a Muggle-repelling charm around him, hoping that this spell would be effective against Mr. Filch. The reality was developing just as Harry had expected. Filch seemed to have remembered something urgent and hurried away with Mrs. Rawls, who was meowing loudly. He scratched his head as he walked. What urgent matter did I have? Harry was very surprised. He accidentally discovered something he had never known before. But now was not the time to be happy. He floated up, and the crazy magic in his body sprayed out from under his feet and hit the ground, forming an upward reaction force to support Harry's movement. Human jet plane. Voldemort glanced at Harry in surprise and sighed. Although he wanted to do something to Harry, the inexplicable restrictions did not allow him to do so. Even if he cast a spell in front of him, he could not do so. That was why he let him point his wand at him and did not move. Voldemort wanted to disgust Harry, so he used his lifelong acting skills and hid some of the pampering he learned from his Muggle memories in his eyes. This emotion did not last even a second in his eyes before Voldemort vomited because of his own disgust. He bent down, as if someone had dug a finger into his throat. I am Voldemort, and I would rather die in such a disgusting way. He straightened his back. Harry didn't care about Voldemort's twists and turns. He had finally caught him. The new favor and old hatred were almost overwhelmed him. He thought of several different ways to die. Although he was also curious about why he listened to him so obediently, that was not the point now. He pointed his wand at Voldemort and brought him to the door of the Room of Requirement. Looking at this familiar place, Voldemort's heart began to beat rapidly. He was worried and afraid. Did Harry already discover the Horcrux he had hidden here? He suddenly wanted to attack Harry, but the immediate pain warned him that death would definitely come faster than he could attack. Voldemort obediently followed Harry into the Room of Requirement, and as soon as he entered the house, a cold wind suddenly blew, and Harry wanted to cast a warming spell on himself. The house suddenly became different. The space inside was slightly twisted, with half of it being a storage room filled with things that previous students had hidden in this room, including various exercises, workbooks, smelly socks, flying brooms, worn wizard hats, desks with broken legs, some iron utensils, and even a pile of moldy food. Harry's head ached. This place looked so familiar. Was he supposed to do something? Or was there something different going on in this place? You noticed something was wrong with Harry. He flipped through the extracted memories and saw some interesting scenes. Harry also came closer, trying to see something from the blurry ball of light. The girl bent down slightly, her black hair falling down like a waterfall, blocking one side of her face. There was a strand of hair on her rosy lips, which she pursed unconsciously. Bayou turned his head to take a look, his Adam's apple sliding downwards slightly. Ever since he used a spell to hit Harry last time, the number of their conversations had decreased. Usually, the two of them just kept a distance from each other, living in peace. Bayou suppressed the throbbing in his heart and stayed away from Harry. He covered the ball of light with his hands, and after he saw clearly what he wanted to know, he stuffed it back into another space. Chapter 92. Stalemate. Harry had no idea of the twists and turns in Bayou's mind. He didn't think that his blind threats could really make Voldemort obedient. Now it seemed that this control ability was similar to Draco's. What are you doing here? Voldemort felt very awkward now. His dignity as a demon would not allow him to just bow down to someone, especially a child who had once trembled in fear under his hands. However, there was always a voice in his heart telling him to respect his master. Seeing Voldemort remain silent, the rage that Harry had just suppressed in his heart suddenly burst out, and all the past repression, pain, struggle, and tears drowned him. This made him raise his wand, Invisible Strike. Harry shouted loudly, using all the magic power in his body to send out multiple beams of light. Voldemort wanted to dodge, but the inexplicable force restricted him. He wanted to fight back, but his sixth sense told him that if he fought back, the pain would be more powerful than the pain of the spell itself. He watched helplessly, despairingly, as the knife-like curse scraped fiercely on his skin, leaving one cut after another that went deep into his bone marrow. Yes, this is not his body, this is a Muggle's body. An idea came to Voldemort's mind, which could make Harry's soul unstable. The backlash brought about by this idea, combined with the pain caused by the invisible sword scraping his body, greatly stimulated Voldemort. Stop! Harry, I told you to stop! Gryffindor roared in Harry's mind. He could also see what was happening around Harry and communicate with him. From Harry's perspective, he saw the man lying on the ground, weak but still unruly. Just now Harry's soul was shaken, and the space he was in also shook. Harry calmed down. He looked at Voldemort lying in a pool of blood, his clothes torn to pieces and his torn body. Harry realized that as long as Voldemort stayed in this Muggle's body for one more day, Harry would be powerless against him. He cast a counter-curse of invisible force on Voldemort to quickly heal the wounds on his body, cleaned the bloodstains on the ground, sewed up his clothes, and tied him to a stool. Now there is nothing he can do to him. The two people here were stuck in another kind of stalemate. Quirrell, who was lying on the ground, was awakened by the licking of a cat's tongue. The disillusionment curse on him had not yet been lifted. Filch only saw his kitten licking the air. He picked it up with heartache. It was just that when he picked her up, he felt his fingers touching something cold, but this feeling immediately disappeared like the millions of thoughts he usually had, and did not attract his special attention. Yes, Filch was back again. He remembered that he had gone to the office on the 8th floor for something. He came to see Headmaster Dumbledore. He had some precautions that the headmaster needed to announce to the students, but the little wizards didn't listen to what he said. So he came back in a hurry. But for some reason his own kitten kept running over here. Quirrell woke up, but he wished he was still asleep. He found himself lying on the cold floor, and his cheeks were still wet. He looked up and saw Filch's face. He asked, "Is there anything more embarrassing than this situation?" Quirrell didn't know he was under a disillusionment charm, but he soon came to his senses. Didn't Voldemort just cast a stunning charm on him? Why did he just leave him on the floor? Wasn't he afraid that he would tell Dumbledore? No, he had to quickly tell his master the fact that Voldemort had come to Hogwarts. He propped himself up and stood up. He was about to go back, but before leaving, he seemed to have thought of something and turned around to say something to Filch. Filch also heard the crunching noise in front of him. He hugged his cat in fear and took a few steps back. "Who is it? Peeves, is that you?" Can't he see him?" Qiluo wondered in his heart. He focused his attention on his body and found that there was a cool membrane flowing constantly. Quirrell breathed a sigh of relief. He was sure that there must be someone else who had come. What a good person! He tiptoed past Filch, bringing up a gust of cool breeze. With his many years of experience fighting young wizards, Filch plucked up his courage and grabbed Quirrell who was moving next to him. "Hey! Which college are you from? Shouldn't you be in class at this time? Why are you here making trouble?" Filch was very happy, but he soon became unhappy. Quirrell reluctantly lifted the disillusionment spell, revealing a depressed face. Looking at the professor in front of him, Filch choked. "What kind of magical habit is this? Do you like to make yourself invisible and then sleep on the floor? Isn't he afraid of being stepped on by the little wizard? Let's not talk about how embarrassed Qiluo is right now. Harry has no way to deal with Voldemort now. The Horcruxes have forgotten where they are hidden. If he is killed, he will refuse to leave this Muggle body. If he is tortured, how can he tell Harry where he put the Horcruxes?" Harry was tired of standing, so he conjured up a light green sofa and collapsed on it again. Voldemort looked at Harry's lazy appearance, and his heart was full of anger. What did he mean by this? Did he look down on him? "Where is your Horcrux hidden?" Harry asked helplessly. Voldemort was not surprised that Harry knew these things. In his eyes, the mysterious space in Harry's head was omnipotent, and it was not surprising that he knew everything. This was also the reason why he sneaked into Hogwarts. He wanted to move his things before Harry turned his attention to the Horcruxes, so he had moved the golden cup hidden in the vault and the resurrection stone hidden in the cottage to a place no one knew except him. But who would have expected that he would meet Harry, who had gone ahead on his way to the room of requirement? Both of my Horcruxes are in you. Voldemort spoke the truth, choking Harry half to death. If you want to destroy me, why don't you commit suicide? Voldemort endured the severe pain in his heart and smiled as he stabbed Harry again. Seeing that he really had no ability to compete with Harry now, Voldemort's mind turned slightly, and he picked up his original idea again. How about entering Harry's mind again and seeing if he could go in and take away some of his current power? The magical space he entered could completely confine him. He could now follow Harry and find a chance to go in, or to understand it, to see if he could use it for himself. This was definitely more powerful than the Philosopher's Stone, the Invisibility Cloak, and the Elder Wand. Chapter 93. Encore. Harry looked at the man tied to the stool. His face was extremely unfamiliar, but the soul inside exuded a disgusting aura. Do you have a way to trap him? Harry asked. I have a way. I have a way. Two voices suddenly popped up in Harry's mind. Bayou was complacent and Gryffindor was calm and determined. Harry sighed helplessly. Ever since he came into this world, he had never felt lonely again. It was really nice to have such a noisy head every day. Not only does he have multiple people in his mind, he can also talk to them at any time. There are also many pets around him to entertain him every day. He thought of the two little snakes nestled in his bed. Every time he went to bed, he felt cold and had to worry about whether his roommates would discover them. Fortunately, he was smart enough. Harry looked down at the exposed part of his arm again and for the first time felt that he had too much. Go ahead. Harry held his breath and concentrated, trying to distinguish the unique intonation of each individual voice from the duet, but in this situation he usually dealt with Bayou first. Find a way to trap him for some more time. After waiting for half a year, when the new year begins, you can absorb this person's soul into your brain again. Bayou turned the view and showed Harry the subtitles that appeared on the glass wall. The task of exploring the trajectory of Hogwarts magic has turned grey. There is also a task of seizing Hogwarts authority below it, which is still emitting a faint light. The progress bar shows that it is less than half completed. What's the difference between saying it and not saying it? Doesn't he know it yet? Harry ignored it. This was a bit too unreliable. What he wanted was a solution to this difficult problem in a very short time. Seeing that Harry didn't say anything, Bayou shut his mouth in frustration. Instead, Gryffindor's advice seemed to be very useful. I have a way, but it may take some preparation. Gryffindor waited for a while before speaking. Seeing Harry's performance just now, the person in another space seemed to have spoken as well, and he didn't want to overlap. I can bring this person's consciousness to the space we are in, and I have the ability to trap him in this space. Gryffindor said. Harry was a little surprised. Is that okay? What is okay? Bayou wondered, what was Harry talking about? Harry was startled and his heart began to beat violently, as if his whole heart was about to jump out of his atrium. His left atrium was filled with fear, and his right ventricle was filled with guilt. The blood vessels responsible for transporting blood began to fluctuate with the rhythm. Harry felt unwell. Really, he had started to become careless. Harry sensed something was wrong. She held her own heart, which also began to beat violently, and complained that Harry was still so unstable. Harley began to cry out in pain, covering her heart with her hands. Bayou was attracted by Harley's cry. He looked over worriedly, feeling a little guilty. Was this the after effect of his last attack on Harley? Harry breathed a sigh of relief. Tie him up for 2 more days, and my preparations will be complete, Gryffindor instructed, and then the voice disappeared. Harry looked at this casual man with some embarrassment. It's impossible for him to do nothing for the next 2 days and just watch Voldemort here. In the next 2 days, he will have to take several final exams. These exams will be completed in public and will be tested by many young wizards. They will not only train the psychological quality and adaptability of the candidates, but also reflect their true level in facing crises. Harry knew that he might have played a part in the reason for this event, so he couldn't just give up. Harry was thinking hard and kept silent. Voldemort was also trying hard to suppress his impulse. He could feel that the crown hidden deep in the pile of junk was stirring, and he was communicating with another him. Don't come over for now. What are you coming for? What qualifications do you have to order me around? Those who have failed should reflect on themselves instead of pointing fingers here. The crown glowed slightly yellow, and stood out among the grey objects. As long as Harry took a closer look, he could see the unique thing emitting a halo. Isn't this person the other living Horcrux you found? I smell the scent of our kind on him. Crown was a little dissatisfied. Why is my future self so timid? I strive to be great, and everyone should crawl at my feet. Go back quickly. The Crown did not listen. According to his own consciousness, he wanted to get close to the living Horcrux, then merge into his body and control the man's original consciousness. Voldemort, who was tied to a stool and resting, was thinking carefully about the plan. He opened one of his closed eyes and glanced at Harry, who was thinking hard. I think it's still feasible. Okay, let's work together later and try to see if we can summon out the two Horcruxes in Harry's body. The two Voldemorts communicated with each other through consciousness. Harry took out an envelope he carried with him and wanted to summon the man out. But no matter how hard he tried, the fragile envelope wrinkled under his huge force. Harry sighed and felt upset about his own naivety. How could he believe the words of a random person? He tried several times during this period, and his suspicion of that man continued to deepen. Forget it, I'd better trouble Dumbledore. Harry felt that at this moment, the safest way was to let Dumbledore keep a close eye on Voldemort. But where can he find him now? Draco doesn't need to think about it, he should still be preparing for the exam. Dobby's level is too low, he probably doesn't know about this. Professor Snape must know, but he doesn't want to expose this ability to talk in his mind. Forget it, Harry sighed, let's put the overall situation first. He praised himself for his sense of justice and sacrificed his own interests for the benefit of everyone. Professor, Professor. Snape was teaching a potion class to senior students. In front of him was a silver dry pot with golden liquid flowing slightly inside. The preparation of the medicine had reached the most critical part, and any small mistake might lead to all the previous efforts being wasted. The wizards below listened attentively. They all had talent in potions, so they were able to enter Professor Snape's potions improvement class. Every word the professor said here would be invaluable guidance if put outside. When it came to the most critical moment, everyone held their breath and looked expectant. Professor! Harry called out loudly from a distance. Snape's hand holding the herbs trembled slightly, and a piece of grass fell into the dry pot. The golden liquid immediately turned into a dark brown solid, emitting an extremely high temperature and an unpleasant odor. Finally, it evaporated into a brown-green mist that filled the air above the entire classroom. Everyone in the classroom couldn't help but vomit. No. Snape showed a distressed look. Chapter 94. Showing Power. Professor Snape's face was covered with a thick layer of wall dust. His originally greasy hair was wrapped by the splashing brown-green gas, forming columnar hair as thick as fingers, which was the Pro Max Plus version of dreadlocks. A black wizard robe that fits tightly and is covered with a black and green waistcoat on top. Snape's heart has now turned into a burning volcano. If anyone says something to him, the volcano will erupt and turn everyone into ash, which will moisten the soil beneath the volcano. The wizards sitting in their seats lowered their heads. No one dared to witness the miserable situation of Professor Bat at this time. Although they did not say anything, their shaking shoulders revealed many things. The little witch in the front had shaking shoulders like a butterfly spreading its wings to fly, and this butterfly landed on the erupting volcano, and all of a sudden only ashes were left. Everyone was kicked out except Snape. He cleaned the stains on his body, but the new look was not so easy to remove. The potion he brewed this time would require some new potions to remove it. He remembered the voice that had just made him lose consciousness. Why did it sound so much like the troll from Gryffindor? He listened carefully again, but there was no sound. Could it be his own hallucination? Did he miss Harry so much? For various reasons, when Snape was in Harry's sea of consciousness, Harry concealed his magical abilities from him for various considerations. When calling Professor, Harry got a little scared after a few calls. A gaze from the abyss made Harry shut his mouth. The abyss came from Snape's eyes. During the hesitation, that minute of communication is missed. Or we should call Dobby and ask him to go talk to Professor Snape to see if we can discuss it. Harry glanced warily at Voldemort, who was resting with his eyes closed, and recalled his control ability. He was very sure that Voldemort would not hurt him. This was the first time that this system did something good. In the mysterious space of Gryffindor, the sky outside the castle suddenly changed. It was covered with dark clouds and yellow lightning struck from time to time. The water in the Black Lake was shaking violently, and most of it spilled on the shore. The grass on the shore was moistened all of a sudden and grew wildly. Some of the grass grew to a height of 2 meters. A swirling pool of water appeared in the center of the Black Lake. The pool was getting bigger and bigger, and a huge octopus was looming in the vortex. In the real world, outside Hogwarts Castle, it was a sunny and windy day, and some Quidditch teams were training on the playground. Some walked on the lawn, others headed toward the greenhouse. Some students who did not have classes were walking by the lake, some were resting under the shade of trees, and others were taking out their fishing rods and casting the hooks into the Black Lake. A huge octopus tentacle popped out and was happily communicating with the little wizard who was fishing. The fishing rod was rolled into the octopus's tentacles and then thrown out, hitting a passing classmate hard on the head. The unfortunate child touched his wet hair and finally decided to stay away from the big octopus. The big octopus was in high spirits. On the other octopus's tentacles stood a few brave little wizards, 2 of whom had red hair and were particularly noticeable. They were laughing and making noises wantonly. Suddenly, the sky outside Hogwarts darkened, as if someone had blocked the sunlight. The whole world suddenly became dark. Some people looked up curiously and found that a very thick and huge black cloud was floating over Hogwarts. Although the sun was still shining in the distance, there was a risk of rain nearby. Dark clouds pressed down on the city, threatening to destroy it. Armor shone like golden scales towards the sun. Suddenly, a yellow lightning flashed in the middle of the dark clouds. At this moment, the space of Gryffindor reached an unprecedented consensus with the outside world. One of the 4 founders of Hogwarts only then revealed his true influence on the castle. With the help of Harry's body, the progress bar on the glass wall was rushing up crazily. Bayou looked at it in surprise, with his mouth wide open, which did not close for a long time. Dumbledore, who was thousands of miles away, felt his control over the school suddenly decline exponentially, just like the stock market trend during the financial crisis, which was heartbreaking. He secretly cried out in alarm and called out to his phoenix fox in his heart. At the same time, he said sorry to the person he was chatting with, and immediately changed to apparition. As soon as Nick Mellor took out the Philosopher's Stone in his hand, he saw his old friend running away in a rage. How did the Philosopher's Stone get returned? Harry just agreed to this plan, his head became dizzy and he lost consciousness. It doesn't have to wait 2 days. Harry opened his eyes again, and this time his body contained a majestic and great soul. Harry's emerald green eyes, with a blue glow hidden deep within, are swaying slightly. Still waters run deep, and this is the confidence that has accumulated over thousands of years. He pointed his wand at Voldemort. You are Voldemort. Bayou's entire space was still, and suddenly his connection with Harry was cut off. He couldn't see clearly what was happening in the outside world. Only the progress bar that was jumping up wildly might indicate that something was happening. The whole castle came alive. There was a slight tremor, the walls of the 1,000-year-old castle were shaking slightly, the portraits began to stir, the cavalrymen hidden in the corners began to wipe off the dust on their bodies, revealing their spears, and the spiral staircases between the floors began to spin wildly. The door of the secret room in the washroom on the 2nd floor opened and closed again, and Myrtle, who was so scared that she cried, crawled into the toilet and escaped again. Suddenly, a beam of light emerged from the depths of the quiet forest and rushed towards the Black Lake. It was so scary that the person hiding inside was terrified. What was going on? Was it Dumbledore who called him? He looked around helplessly. He was surrounded by a mysterious magic. He planned to sneak out after a while, disguised as a student. The statues in the Ravenclaw dormitory emitted a blue light, and the portraits of successive headmasters in the headmaster's office suddenly felt a mysterious force calling them. The 4 colored funnels placed in front of the auditorium were spinning violently at this time. This was the first headmaster since the establishment of Hogwarts. Everyone was happy about his arrival. Quiet. Hogwarts returned to peace once again, as if the turmoil just now was just an illusion. Professor Cat rubbed his eyes, looked at the chattering little wizards below, and said sternly, "Let's start the class." "What are you looking at? Have you learned everything I just taught you?" Snape, who had finished class early, cast an disillusionment charm on himself, quietly avoided the young wizard, and prepared to sneak into the potions office to prepare the potion, change his appearance first, and then do other things. But when he was preparing the potion, the castle shook again, and this time his hair turned into an afro. Snape opened his mouth and a puff of black smoke came out of it. He coughed bitterly and felt that he had a very unlucky day today. After Harry shouted for silence, the castle fell silent. Voldemort stared at Harry, who had suddenly changed, in amazement, and stopped the crown. The crown had already escaped to the depths of the pile of junk when Harry's aura changed, and buried itself in the textbooks. He then put the textbooks in the shabby desk, and placed the desk next to the bookshelf. He used the magic power he had accumulated over the years, wishing to surround himself with everything. A big part of the reason why Voldemort is still alive and successful is because of his ability to judge the situation. He believes that this is a fine tradition of Slytherin. "Youngster, I heard you are very arrogant." Harry approached slowly, the tip of his wand crackling with electricity. Chapter 95. Fusion. Voldemort said nothing, and until now, he had not yet freed himself from the restraints on his body. "No, no. How could a junior dare to act rashly? Who are you?" He spoke with a slightly respectful tone, without that rebellious attitude and momentum. Although he couldn't see what was happening outside, he could still feel the special treatment this place gave to the person in front of him. Voldemort and the stool he was tied to sank into the quagmire. The environment in the request house changed drastically. The mountain of debris accumulated by previous students immediately retreated far away until it disappeared. Voldemort felt the connection in his mind weakened and he breathed a sigh of relief. The ceiling of the room turned into a deep blue sky with soft white clouds floating slowly above it. The ground below began to float and a lot of tender green grass emerged. Occasionally, small white daisies appeared among the grass. Dandelions floated along his ribs in the wind from somewhere and landed on the tip of his nose. The entire space expanded rapidly, and wherever the magic power passed, miracles were revealed. Mountains appeared in the distance, and a huge lake appeared in the middle. There were creatures in the lake that constantly stirred the water. Voldemort looked over there and saw that it was clearly the Black Lake of Hogwarts. He became even more respectful towards the person in front of him. Could it be that the person happening before his eyes was the person behind the scenes in Harry's mind, the owner of the mysterious power? Harry ignored him. His thin body circled around Voldemort with a scrutinizing look on his face. Voldemort had lived for so many years, and this was the first time he was treated like a commodity. He frowned uncomfortably. "You don't look that great either." Gryffindor looked at the face of the Muggle in front of him and felt that something was not right. What this person did not match his appearance. After complaining, Gryffindor smiled in a good mood as he looked at Voldemort's secretly clenched fists and his aggrieved expression of being angry but not being able to speak out. It was this kid who made Harry so sad, so it seemed he had to teach him a lesson. Harry waved his wand to speed up the fusion process. The surrounding scenery became clearer. He could even see the dewdrops hanging on the grass, the black lumps of soil under the grass, and the earthworms and beetles that were faintly visible in it. The boundary between the lake and the grass was gradually and meticulously portrayed, with dry and moist soil, clear footprints, and small fish jumping out on the surface of the lake. Then, the sky gradually darkened, and dark clouds gradually gathered, becoming thick and low, as if the sky was about to collapse in the next moment, turning everything in the world into ashes. Voldemort raised his head in shock. Could it be? Could it be? He once recalled a passage he had read in a book in the forbidden section of the library when he was a student. The young Voldemort, wearing the Hogwarts school robe, had black hair, a tall stature, a handsome face, and a smile that won everyone's favor. He secretly bribed the librarian at the time, and got the professor's autograph when Professor Dumbledore was away, and stayed in the restricted book area for a whole night. Tom took his wand and carefully avoided the screaming books. He kicked away the brown tentacles that appeared from a dark magic book. He looked at the fragile paper in his hand, his expression still filled with confusion. Dietary summary: why would a legendary story have such a title? For the sake of his descendants, the gods gave them wisdom and magic power, a superior living environment, and endless treasures and wealth. All of them are immortal, well-fed, and smart, and all of them can do whatever they want. Tom looked down again in the light of his wand. This was the manuscript of the founder that he found when he opened the secret room in Slytherin. But this one was different. He could see the scribbling and panic on it. This emotion caught his attention. The word longevity on it also stimulated him and made him extremely excited. Could it be that? Could this be the reason why Slytherin went in the opposite direction from the other three? Slytherin discovered the secret of longevity and found the legendary god. Tom continued to look down, but unfortunately some of the words on it became blurred due to the wear and tear of time. God, created, chosen, bestowed. 1,000 years later, through the few words he could see clearly, he could vaguely piece together what the following words meant. A strong desire for power surged in his heart, and he was eager to explore this secret. But he also gained a book during that journey, Secrets of Cutting-Edge Black Magic. Compared to those vague and unconfirmed legends, he was more willing to believe in the making of Horcruxes which was in his own hands. His inner pride made him unwilling to accept the power bestowed by others. He wanted to be the master of others instead of finding a master of his own, so he ignored this text. After reading the contents of the manuscript clearly, he burned it with fire in the restricted area of the library, leaving only a pile of residue. Who knew where it floated to? Voldemort's thoughts returned to the present. He looked at the thin yet powerful figure in the distance. The memories of his youth seemed to be confirmed at this moment. Originally, his memories were incomplete, and there was no such memory in Harry's sea of consciousness when he first came into it. Later, after escaping, he contacted several of his Horcruxes and had just had a deep communication with the Crown. Voldemort felt that this was a godsend opportunity. If that little brat Harry could do it, why couldn't he? Voldemort thought of the prophecy in July and secretly clenched his fists. The surrounding environment has changed greatly from the beginning, but at the space of Gryffindor, and the outskirts of Hogwarts at this time, the three places of time and space inexplicably overlapped together, and the room of requirement showed its true magic. The light was bright, and Voldemort closed his eyes tightly. He did not move at all, hoping to leave a good impression on that powerful man. He was best at saving trouble and integrating his own resources by taking advantage of others. This was the case when he was young and even more so now. Voldemort looked at the surrounding environment, which became peaceful and quiet. Even the Hogwarts castle became exactly the same. Two figures seemed to walk out of it, a man and a woman, one of whom he was very familiar with. In the real world, Harry had a dazed look on his face, while the Muggles were looking at everything around them in horror. He carefully touched the little boy in front of him. Looking at this completely different space, he screamed and then fainted again. The crown hidden in the deepest part of the pile of debris was trembling with fear. The will on the crown began to compete with him for the sovereignty of the crown. Ms. Ravenclaw appeared in the sky, staring at the black air below with a cold expression, and did not speak for a long time. Chapter 96. Hug. I really don't want to pay attention to you, but you stink. The first words spoken by Lady Ravenclaw after 1,000 years dealt a heavy blow to the dark devil who had been able to call the wind and rain and dominated the world for many years. People have always said that he is evil, but no one has ever said that he stinks. On the real Black Lake, the Velis twins were floating happily on the surface of the lake. Although the giant octopus that had just played with them had disappeared, they still enjoyed the feeling of being surrounded by water. The warm sunlight penetrated the black clouds and shone on the lake, making it sparkle. Then the sunlight gradually grew stronger, the dark clouds became thinner little by little, and the hole became bigger little by little. Then the entire sunlight poured down from the hole above the cloud. Then the huge cloud could not hold on any longer, and it broke into pieces, turned white, and continued to float leisurely in the sky, rushing towards its own distant place. Brother, what happened just now? George, who had taken off his shirt and was bare-chested, was floating leisurely on the lake, asking his brother Fred. After waiting for a long time without seeing any response, I realized that the man had closed his eyes peacefully, as if he had been dating Joe Gong for a long time. Forget it. What does it have to do with us? George also imitated his brother, yawned, brushed away the small fish swimming around him with his hands, closed his eyes, and enjoyed the warmth of the sun. But who would have thought that a figure would suddenly grow from small to large and appear by the lake? It was Percy. You two are simply lawless. Percy looked at the many people who had gathered around. They were whispering to each other, their eyes fixed on the two people floating on the lake. Besides envy, there was also ridicule in their eyes. There were also some first-grade girls whose cheeks turned red with embarrassment when they saw the unrestrained attire, but they did not forget to open their fingers and steal a glance at her secretly. Although due to the limitations of time and space, we can only see white things, Percy really didn't want to recognize his two younger brothers. His toes almost dug out a Barbie castle in the soft grass. His red hair and red cheeks set off each other beautifully. Come back soon, both of you. Percy used his wand to amplify his voice, making sure the two troublemakers could hear his call. Hey, George, do you hear anybody talking? I heard it. So what should we do? Should we listen to that prudish guy? What are you listening to? Are you feeling comfortable in the sun? This is quite comfortable. Then what else? The two brothers continued to ignore their elder brother's calls. There were some people nearby who were ready to make some moves and could not bear it any longer. The sky was cloudy just now, but now it was a little dazzling. The sun was scorching the grass, as if it wanted to make up for the light and heat that had just been missing to the ground in an instant. Plop, plop, a few more little wizards jumped into the middle of the black lake. Before he could do anything, the octopus appeared in the lake. He used his huge tentacles to stick to the little wizard who was arrogantly bathing in the pot. After spinning them around a few times, he threw them far away into the grass. Percy couldn't bear it, so he used the wand in his hand to cast a slowing spell on several people. Then he stood in front of the two brothers, looking down at the two troublemakers with a dangerous look. Same place, different space. Gryffindor lifted the restrictions on Bai-Yu. Bai-Yu was so anxious that his mouth was blistering. What happened just now? Why did this inexplicable situation happen again? No one answered him. The task completion rate on the glass wall suddenly soared to 85%. Bai-Yu secretly wondered, could it be the sequelae caused by the seizure of authority? Bai-Yu turned around and saw Harley still sleeping quietly on the sofa. Harry and Harry walked out of the castle together and came before Voldemort. Voldemort looked at the three Harrys and his pupils suddenly became larger. What was going on? Harry looked around curiously, seeing so many of himself. The last time he saw this was after he drank the polyjuice potion. Harry chuckled and instantly grew taller, his muscles became thicker, his body became strong, his face was rough and handsome, his hair was messy, and he exuded a wild aura. A huge amount of information poured into Voldemort's brain, making it difficult for him to accept it all of a sudden. Everything that happened during this period was beyond his cognition, as if he had returned to the time when he first entered the magical world. Didn't they say it would take 2 days? How come it's healed so quickly? Harry turned around and asked Gryffindor in confusion. Go look at the lake. Gryffindor did not choose to explain immediately. He pointed to the lake to Harry. Harry's mouth opened in surprise. A huge golden shape appeared on the lake. With the flow of the water, each line was constantly fluctuating, but the overall structure did not change. A head popped out in the middle. Harry squinted his eyes, trying to see it more clearly. Gryffindor saw what he was thinking, and with a flick of his wand, Voldemort immediately flew back into the castle with his stool, and the huge door slammed shut. On the other side, he brought the two Harrys and flew to the center of the pattern. The figure gradually appeared, emitting a faint blue light, with an elegant face, a slender body, and wise eyes that seemed to be able to see through everything. It was Ms. Ravenclaw. This is an unexpected surprise. Gryffindor said to the two people with a smile, and then ran to the lady in the middle impatiently and hugged her tightly in his arms. Welcome home. As soon as the cheerful voice fell, Gryffindor's expression changed immediately. He looked at his arm in disbelief. The thick long arm pierced through the abdomen of Ms. Ravenclaw. He shook it hard, but it was just a shadow. Look what I brought you. The woman smiled and placed her imaginary hand on Gryffindor's head. Gryffindor bent down slightly, wanting the woman to be able to see it, even though it was just a wishful thinking. The Ravenclaw lady held a black ball of light in her other hand. The ball of light kept struggling and roaring in her light blue hand. Voldemort, who was imprisoned in the castle, opened his eyes wide in fear. Who was it? Who brought another him here? Harry stood in the air and opened his eyes wide in surprise. He felt his hands trembling slightly. He seemed to be particularly interested in the power of the orchestra, or to be more precise, it was a desire from the depths of his soul. Harry grabbed his raised arm and punched it down hard. Harry on the side patted Harry's shoulder with heartache. She always felt that it was not a good thing for Gryffindor to bring Voldemort to this space. Unless he could be completely eliminated, it would only be like driving a tiger to devour a wolf, or inviting a wolf into the house. Harry must maintain his firm will during this period, otherwise, is Harry still Harry? Or is he still a mixture of Harry and Voldemort's soul? He is so close to the enemy who killed his father and mother, but he has no way to do anything about it. In the long run, this is not a good thing for Harry's spirit. Chapter 97. The Gate. Gryffindor took a ball of light from Rowena's hand, and the black mist struggled, screaming, cursing, and desperately trying to escape. Heaven sensed his dissatisfaction and actually escaped from Gryffindor's hands. Gryffindor opened his eyes wide in surprise, not understanding how such a small soul power could be able to escape from his hands. It was not until I saw the faint light emanating from Harry that I understood the reason. Harry looked at the black ball of light running towards him, and somehow reached out his hand and grabbed it. Instantly, he felt a throbbing sensation and got goosebumps all over his body. Seeing this, Harry slapped Harry's hand fiercely, but the black ball of light seemed to have seen something more attractive and immediately penetrated into Harry's soul. She felt a sharp pain all over her body, and then she squatted down unconsciously, covering her lower abdomen tightly with her hands. In fact, it was her head that hurt, and Harry didn't know why she did this. "Harry, are you okay?" Harry quickly squatted down and gently patted Harry's back with his hand. "It's okay," Harry said lightly. She raised her head and faced Harry. The two pairs of emerald eyes met again. Harry was stunned. One of Harry's eyes was a bright emerald green, but the other eye emitted a faint black aura. Harry didn't know that when he first absorbed it, his situation was exactly the same as hers, and the two people's situations overlapped again. Gryffindor didn't have time to reminisce with his old friend. He hurried over and said with a sense of self-blame, "This is all my fault." He glanced at the two little ones squatting down, then turned around and looked at his good friend. "Rowena, do you have any ideas?" Ravenclaw looked at Gryffindor with a worried look on his face and a self-blaming expression, and spoke slowly. "Yes, there are, but it may take some time." Rowena thought of the tragic experience of sharing a container with Voldemort. She felt powerless and resentful as if her home had been stolen. The usually elegant lady suddenly wanted to curse, which was rare. What happened to the students after this? Why were they all so neurotic? Rowena floated out from the center and landed lightly beside Harry. Before she was about to do anything, she spoke to her old friend. "During the division process, I may need to sleep for a while. Bring me the crown where I used to rest. I know you have the ability to do this." Gryffindor nodded vigorously. If there was a chance to atone for his sins, that would be great. Harry on the side didn't feel like saying anything because he felt that he was becoming extremely irritable, impulsive, irrational, and had almost lost interest in everything. He looked at everyone around him and felt an extremely strong feeling of disgust from the inside out. He even wanted to give them an Avada and drag the whole world down with him. Yu, who was in the space nearby, saw the entire glass wall suddenly turn red. A thick black and red aura was drilling in and out of it. He felt his control was shrinking little by little. For a moment, he didn't know what was happening. This shouldn't be right. He used the abilities he had acquired here over the years to transform into a ray of blue light and penetrate into the glass wall. The glass wall was still there, flashing that chilling light. In the deepest part of the glass-walled space, 3 drops of blood were floating quietly, and there was a human figure. Quirrell said that he was innocent. He didn't know why he had just escaped from that embarrassing scene. He had just endured Filch's strange look and had to explain to him with gritted teeth. Just after he breathed a sigh of relief, he didn't know why he came to such a strange place again. He looked around and saw silence all around. Everything was azure blue, as if he was in the depths of the sea. He stood there quietly, watching the rippling water, looking at the vastest sea in the world. Suddenly, his attention was attracted by 3 small things floating right in front of him. What is this? Quirrell could feel that the thing was very familiar. There was blood in it that seemed to be his own. He didn't understand it, but he just knew it. He stretched out his hand like a possessed man, and when his slender white fingers touched one of the drops, his whole body was sucked into a spinning white vortex, and the drop of blood mixed into it. His drop of blood turned into a green pearl and fell to the ground with a plop. Yu came in. He walked past as if he didn't see the 2 drops of blood, and went straight into a deeper place. Suddenly, a big door appeared in the space. It was about the height of 2 stories. The edge of the door was inlaid with gold and there was a pattern of a 9-clawed golden dragon carved inside. Occasionally, traces of phoenixes and unicorns could be seen faintly. There is a bronze bracelet in the middle of the gate, which is exquisite and beautiful. A big tree is engraved from the bottom middle of the door. The trunk of the tree hides the entire gap in the door, and the branches and twigs growing from it cover the entire blue gate. Yu looked at this sudden appearance without any surprise on his face, as if he was already used to it. He bowed slightly and said respectfully, "Sir, I don't know what happened. The peripheral controller suddenly turned red just now." Yu paused for a moment and asked in a more tactful tone, "And I feel like I don't have the authority to complete the task you assigned to me." He spoke tentatively. Inside the gate was a majestic palace. The palace was towering into the clouds and was magnificent. Every brick and tile was carved out of jade, and each piece of jade contained a mysterious pattern. At the deepest part, there is a throne, and on the throne sits a figure. His slender fingers are playing with a small green bead. He did not speak, but just changed his posture. During this time, the sound of bells spread faintly in the space. Looking down, it turned out that the man was fixed on the throne, and his feet were tied with transparent ropes. Only a few bells floating above from time to time could prove its existence. Trash! The man said lightly, with a tone of indifference and impatience, "You are really useless." Even though there was such a long distance between them, Bai felt as if the person was speaking right next to his ear. He knelt down in fear and buried his head deeply in the ground. "Don't worry about the red light. Losing your authority is my punishment for you. Just do your own thing and assist Harry in completing the mission." Bai crawled his body even lower. Quirrell was distracted and found himself still standing in the corridor, and Filch, who had been sent away, came back to him again, tilting his head and looking at him strangely. Quirrell scratched his head, looking confused. He wondered what had just happened. But it still had no effect. Chapter 98. Making Friends. Ravenclaw transformed into a stream of blue-green water, slowly flowing into Harry's brow. The hostility in the two people was receding bit by bit, and their whole bodies felt as if they were wrapped in the warm water, warm and fragrant, which gradually washed away the fatigue in their hearts over the years. Harry collapsed to the ground, bringing down Harry next to him with him. Gryffindor looked at them, then smiled and led the two of them to the grass on the shore. The huge golden pattern above the lake turned into a spot of light, floating up into the air. Only Voldemort, who was imprisoned in the castle, had no idea what was happening outside. He broke free from his restraints and hesitated between leaving a good impression on that big shot and finding out the secrets here. He always felt that Harry was in cahoots with that man. In that case, was there any use in his behavior? Voldemort waited carefully and looked at the space around him. This was a kind of magic that only existed in legends. He walked curiously in this familiar yet strange place and heard a sound coming from afar. "We will have one more teacher on our team." "Really? Who told you that?" "Just look outside and you'll know. That big commotion just now only happens when we welcome new friends." "That's true, but what kind of person is it this time?" So, it was Ms. Ravenclaw who sped up the process. After resting, Harry lay on the lawn and asked Gryffindor. "Yes, this time Voldemort entered the room of requirement, and after a while, I felt a familiar breath, which was getting closer and closer, and finally I heard Rowena's voice." Gryffindor explained. "Ah," Harry nodded and asked in a panic, "we made such a big noise outside, you won't find out, right?" "Don't worry, I've lived for so long, how could I make a mistake in such a big matter?" Gryffindor explained confidently. "I advise you to get out of here quickly. I remember you have exams these days. I also advise you to think about how to explain to others what happened here." Gryffindor said as he ran, "When I went out, there was a lot of noise. I believe most people in the castle felt it." Then he slipped into the castle gate and kicked Harry out of the space. He left a message for Harry, "Remember to find the crown." Gryffindor entered the castle and saw that the stool that Voldemort was tied up on had been broken into pieces, with tiny wood chips scattered around it. He raised his eyebrows and grinned, showing his white teeth, as if he was very happy. "What a naughty guy! This is the first time you don't give me face like this." After hearing the conversation of the group of people, Voldemort straightened his clothes, put on what he thought was the most endearing smile, and walked up to the group of people. "Are you the new teacher?" Voldemort took a quick look and found that there was no trace of magic fluctuation on the group of people. He immediately felt a little disdainful. Could they all be Muggles? Or were the powers of this group of people so strong that even his eyesight could not identify them? Voldemort suppressed the doubts and contempt in his heart, walked to the front slowly, firmly, and elegantly, and bowed slightly. "Hi everyone, I'm new here." Voldemort appeared in his mind. At his current appearance, he should be a standard British aristocratic gentleman with a tall and slender figure, handsome face, and gentle manners. It was a pity that he didn't have a hat. If a hat suddenly appeared in his hand, it would add to his temperament. This is what Voldemort thought, and this space also satisfies him. I saw the expression on his face began to change drastically, the exquisite suit was mixed with exquisite leather jacket, the rugged face was mixed with exquisite handsomeness, and as he paused slightly, a top hat suddenly appeared in his hand. Voldemort looked at the hat in his hand with satisfaction, changed back to his normal standing posture, and looked at the group of people in front of him with a gentle expression. It should leave a good impression on them. He was secretly delighted in his heart. This group of people had extraordinary temperament and sharp eyes. Men, women, young and old, everyone had their own personality. Those who could appear here must be extraordinary people. That. A soft voice suddenly came out from the crowd, with a hint of joy in the tone. Voldemort looked closely and found that the muscles on their faces seemed to be twitching. What was going on? Dear madam, how can I help you? Voldemort knew best how to win the hearts of girls. Can I laugh, please? Laugh. Although Voldemort was puzzled as to why he suddenly made this request, he instinctively agreed. Oh, of course, beautiful lady, laughing is everyone's right. After hearing the person's permission, the group of people couldn't hold back any longer. First, the lady laughed heartily, then many people joined them, and then, even the most serious people couldn't hold back their laughter. What's wrong with you? Voldemort was a little puzzled, but at the same time, his contempt and anger grew even stronger. They were so ungrateful. He was the Dark Lord, but he was so servile, and yet they treated him like this. See for yourself. One of them seemed to be unable to bear it, so he casually drew a circle in the air. Then water vapor condensed from the surrounding space and turned into a rotating vortex. Finally, it calmed down and formed a smooth mirror. Voldemort looked at his image in the mirror. At first glance, he thought it was very fashionable. P.S. I don't think a person with good taste can turn himself into a boiled egg and still laugh out loud. At second glance, he thought that this person had a problem with his brain. At third glance, no, there was no third glance. Voldemort was furious and reached out to knock the mirror to the ground. At this time Gryffindor rushed over, and the first thing he saw when he entered was Voldemort's arrogant behavior. You don't know what's good for you. With a cold snort, Voldemort flew out like a kite with a broken string, flew out of the castle window, and flew straight to the Forbidden Forest in this space. The trees in the Forbidden Forest seemed to have consciousness. They suddenly grew taller and the branches seemed to have life. They stretched out long strips and rolled the man in. Looking down from above, the forest opened its bloody mouth and swallowed the falling Voldemort. No. Voldemort regretted his arrogance. He had clearly intended to have a good relationship with this mysterious person. Isn't this the new teacher? Someone in the crowd asked weakly, with a hint of regret in his tone. No, Gryffindor said sternly, this is a criminal, a demon who should have died long ago. Chapter 99. Tom. Knock, knock, knock. Snape, who was sitting in his office and cleaning his hair, suddenly heard a knock on the door. He hardened his heart and poured all the medicine on the table on his hair. His hair was soon all wet, and the solid matter stuck on it avoided it like a mouse seeing a cat. With the arrival of the potion, the matter was defeated and finally all fell on Snape's clothes. The knocking on the door continued. Professor, Professor, are you there? Dumbledore asked you to come over for something. Cedric, who was standing outside the door, looked unhappy. How could he be in such a bad situation again? He remembered Professor Dumbledore's smiling face just now, made up his mind, and was ready to push the door open. Come in, Snape's unique voice came from inside the room, and Cedric's heart suddenly felt at ease. He pushed the door open and saw Snape standing next to the bubbling cauldron, and his hair was particularly fluffy, falling smoothly on his shoulders. Professor, Headmaster Dumbledore wants you to go to his office. Cedric said respectfully. Okay, I get it. I'll go there later. You go out first. Snape said lightly. Cedric felt as if he had been granted amnesty. He turned around and left in a hurry, intending to complain about this matter to his roommates. It was true that he never got a chance to have good things happen, but always appeared in strange places for no apparent reason. When he walked into the Great Hall, he saw that the long table on the Gryffindor side was particularly lively. Professor McGonagall was standing in the middle of the crowd, pinching the ear of one of the little wizards. She was very angry, and she was so angry that Professor Meowth's hair stood on end. 20 points from Gryffindor. Please, Professor, don't. A familiar voice came to Cedric's ears. Ah, this is not surprising. He smiled in his heart. If it were these two guys, it would be reasonable for Gryffindor to deduct points. Gryffindor would become Gryffindor Jr. Percy stood by with an angry face. He went back to get clothes for the two guys. When he came back, he found that they had been caught by Professor McGonagall, who was criticizing them severely. They really deserved it. Since Hogwarts was founded, no one has ever jumped into the Black Lake to take a bath or play with the octopus. They really don't pay attention to their own safety at all. Although Hermione was very angry, she couldn't stop herself from laughing. She looked at her friend Ron, whose red cheeks and burning ears could be seen faintly with heat coming out. Hermione couldn't help but laugh beside him. I have always known that your two brothers are very individual and have their own ideas, but I didn't expect that they were so thoughtful that Dumbledore would even see such a thing. Ron thought of what had just happened, and the shame and anger in his heart was about to burst out of his chest. No, I have to write a letter to my mother and learn from Ginny. She is really lawless. Ron liked these two characters very much when he was watching the movie. He did not understand their brother Percy's unusually serious behavior. Now he understands it very well and thinks his brother is still a little too kind and conservative. Fred, who had sharp ears, heard it. He ignored Professor McGonagall who was lecturing them and turned his head away quickly. Little Ronnie, don't. Hearing this pleading voice, Ron ran faster, with a fluffy little tail hanging behind him. Wait for me, I have a pen and paper with me. This was Hermione's voice. Dumbledore, who was sitting in the office, held his forehead and felt a little amused and helpless for a moment. He remembered that when he returned to Hogwarts, he was attracted by the little wizards gathered on the lawn. Fawkes took him to fly above the crowd. After the little wizards looked up at the headmaster, they scattered one after another, and there was faint laughter. Dumbledore saw the two people lying on the lawn and the water stains on their bodies. He turned his head and looked at the octopus that was flapping the water in the middle of the black fox. It seemed to be particularly excited. In connection with the glorious deeds of the two brothers, he seemed to know something. Considering that they were both from Gryffindor House, Dumbledore conjured 2 sets of clothes for them. He then grabbed a senior wizard and told him to go find Snape, and grabbed another one and told her to find Professor McGonagall to resolve the issues of their house. The black-haired little Ravenclaw girl was unfortunately chosen, but she looked excited and ran out skipping. What on earth is going on? Dumbledore leaned back in his chair and put an orange candy into his mouth. The long white beard under his chin swayed up and down as he chewed. Tom, Dumbledore called, and the figure slowly emerged. Don't call me all the time, okay? If someone sees us. Dumbledore smiled helplessly. Of course I believe you. I was the one who brought you out of the orphanage and introduced you to the magical world. I have always trusted you, as you know. That's the same trick you used on Snape, right? It didn't work. What do you think about this matter? Dumbledore did not take over his conversation, but opened a new topic and continued to seek Tom's opinion. He could always provide him with refreshing insights in these aspects. Things have changed so much that I can no longer predict what the other me will do. The two of them stood at the lower left corner of Dumbledore's table, placed their hands on it, and magic power surged out. In the blink of an eye, the two of them arrived in a mysterious space. The portraits on the wall behind them seemed to be deceived and ignored their conversation. Even Blake, who usually loves to chatter, shut up and chatted with the portrait next to him. But he still tilted his ear to hear what they were saying, but they had already entered another space. Watching their disappearing backs, Blake curled his lips in boredom. Why is it always like this? This space is very small, and a human body can only move within a range of 10 feet. This space is also very large, so large that one cannot see the end of it. The souls of all the former headmasters stand in it, and behind them are many famous figures in the wizarding world, such as Potions Master and Spell Master, and the end of it is also endless. But Dumbledore and Tom couldn't see. They could only see the entire map of Hogwarts floating in the middle of the 10-foot area. The map was drawn in great detail, with even every secret passage clearly marked. However, the entire map was divided by 2 colors of magic, one was red and the other was blue. Sure enough, my authority has been divided again. Is Hogwarts going to elect the next headmaster? It's obviously not the time yet. Dumbledore was a little confused. Chapter 100. Rest. How should I know? Aren't you the principal? Don't you know about this kind of thing? This was a soul-searching question from his students. The blue and red lights reflected on Dumbledore's face, making him look mysterious. Let's just wait and see. Once it reaches a certain level, the name of another source of magic power will be revealed. Dumbledore was a little confused. If it was just like this, his feelings at that time should not have been so strong. It felt like one's own authority was completely taken away by another irresistible powerful force, leaving him with no ability to resist at all. If that's all, it should be a very slow and steady progress. Forget it. Dumbledore stroked his beard, looked at the few white hairs in his hand, sighed. He was getting old. He would wait for Harry to grow taller and sort out the things in his head, and then see if he could take over his burden. Godfather. What do you think of me being Harry's godfather? Dumbledore asked the man next to him. No one answered him for a long time. He turned around and found that the man was gone. This world is too dangerous. Children need to have two fathers. Dumbledore recited the proverb he had heard in the Muggle world. After experiencing all these things, he felt that these words made a lot of sense. What's more, Dumbledore sighed, the other guy was still in Azkaban. No respect for the elderly or the young at all. Dumbledore thought of the old friend he had abandoned, Grindelwald who harassed him every day, Harry who was deeply troubled, and Snape who appeared inexplicably. His brain was about to explode. I'm old, I should have retired long ago. After Dumbledore confirmed that there was nothing unusual in Hogwarts, he asked Fawkes to take him to another school in Europe. He also had to meet the last headmaster and then rush back tomorrow to preside over the first exam. Harry, whose consciousness returned to the required item, had just opened his eyes and seen everything around him clearly when Bayou's sinister voice rang in his ears. Should I congratulate you on completing the task? Or should I be angry that you are hiding something from me? You should know that I have a way to make you talk. Harry frowned, and thought of the soul-worshipping pain he had suffered the previous 2 times. How should I write this? Bayou threatened Harry in a timid manner, but he knew that he no longer had the usual means. But Harry didn't know, maybe he was scared out. Harry was about to speak, but he found that the Muggle lying on the ground suddenly stood up, raised his hands, rushed towards him, and muttered something, it's you, and you weird people again. Stupefied, Harry helplessly knocked the Muggle unconscious again. He remembered the pink bottle, how about? Give it a try? After all, he couldn't let the Muggles remember what happened here, but he wasn't very good at this. That's good, another class. This was the voice of Gryffindor. You haven't answered me yet. What happened just now? This was Bayou's voice. Harry felt a little annoyed. He really wanted to throw these 2 guys out of his mind one day. Since coming into this world, there has not been a quiet day in his life. Forget it, alas. I don't know what just happened. Harry lied with his eyes open, I just felt dizzy all of a sudden and lost consciousness. Actually, what Harry said was correct. He must have been attacked by Voldemort. Harry pointed at the Muggle who had fainted on the ground. Speaking of this, I wonder how Quirrell, who discovered Voldemort, is doing now? It shouldn't be stepped on by others, right? For the first time, Harry felt a little guilty towards this person who suddenly appeared. It was also his inconsiderateness. How about going out and taking a look? Harry thought so and did so. As for the crown, Harry glanced around the room and thought it should be inside the room of requirement, otherwise Gryffindor would not be able to sense it. He lowered his head, looked at the Muggle lying on the ground, cast an disillusionment charm on him, and then a stunning charm so that he would not wake up in the middle of the process and no one else would see him. It would be better to let Quirrell take him back to where he originally lived, since he has implicated this person. In his sea of consciousness, Bayou looked at the silent Harry and knew that it was useless to ask any more questions. Instead of listening to such perfunctory remarks, he might as well look for clues himself. Did Voldemort attack? There is such a possibility. After he was able to explore the outside world, he found that the Muggle's soul had changed greatly. Voldemort should have left this body. Harry's soul was in crisis not long after that, but he recovered soon. He looked at the glass wall, which was stained with a light blue color and emitted a halo like water waves. Like the sea, it made people feel inexplicably at ease. It's been so long and you still haven't found a bed for me. A female voice appeared and Bayou heard it. Inside the glass wall, Harley was still lying asleep, her long hair like a waterfall scattered on the leather sofa, but she looked a little depressed. Bayou sighed and thought, how about conjuring up a bed for her as an apology? Bayou obeyed the instructions in his mind unconsciously and did what he was told. When Harley was sleeping, the sofa she was lying on suddenly became wider and bigger. The leather turned into a soft bed. A thick quilt condensed out of thin air and gently covered Harley's body. The sofa cushion under her head turned into a silk pillow, and she sank into it. Harley felt very warm all over, and there was a cool substance flowing slowly in her head. She had never felt such a comfortable moment since she was born. Harley's face showed a happy expression unconsciously in her sleep. She rubbed her fair cheek against the soft pillow, buried herself deeper in the bed, smelled the fragrance emanating from the bed, and fell into a deeper sleep. Harry, who was in the Gryffindor space, felt the warmth coming from all over her body and could hardly resist it. She yawned loudly and was seen by the Gryffindor next to her. "Go to bed. Your wound hasn't healed yet and you've been hurt again," Gryffindor said in a lighter tone. "Okay." Harry nodded, sleepy-eyed and walking slowly, taking one step at a time. Gryffindor looked at Harry slowly walking back inside. As Harry walked, the space around him began to change gradually. The tiles of the shabby corridor slowly turned into smooth white marble. The space of the corridor began to shrink continuously, the length shrank, and the width increased. The window at the end came closer, the classrooms on both sides of the corridor disappeared, and the bed suddenly appeared. "Thank you." Harry turned around, lifted her skirt, squatted down slightly, and expressed her gratitude to Gryffindor. "Lie down." Gryffindor's tone became lighter. "Okay." Harley did as she was told and threw herself hard in the middle of the bed. The soft quilt caught her, but the bright light around her made her squint her eyes involuntarily, then block them with her hands. Gryffindor noticed this detail and waved his hand again. The blue tent fell quietly, wrapping Harry in his bed. Yu, who was in his sea of consciousness, looked at Gu 2000's bed in the center and felt that something was wrong. By the way, with a wave of the hand, another tent appeared and surrounded Harley. Yu and Gryffindor did the same thing in two different spaces and nodded in sync. The man in the blue door saw what happened and sneered, as expected, "You are worthy of being friends for many years." The green bead in his hand was still emitting a faint glow, but the glow was getting dimmer and dimmer. Quirrell, who was about to return to his office, felt increasingly exhausted the further he walked. The noise of the little wizards around him became infinitely louder at this moment, and the corridor began to become distorted. With a thud, Quirrell fell to the ground, and the little wizards around him screamed. "Professor!